All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of XS Exceed. This is Gearface. I'm very, very excited to be presenting, possibly for the final time on this show. Rose is here to teach me about Anji. Rose, thank you so much, as always, for being here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I should clarify that I'm not very excited that this is your final time on the show. I'm actually a little bit bummed about that. I'm very excited that you're here, though.
Thank you.
That part's true. Um, really excited to learn a little bit about Anji. I feel like maybe the least talked about, at least talked about in my earshot, character from season 7. I feel like maybe an underrepresented character, despite being, I think, quite an interesting and quite a strong character. So very excited to learn a little bit about this guy from you.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
over here scanning the characters, and I think I agree with you, actually. I never seen anyone talk about this character, but I
yeah,
fully agree.
it like I feel like he is, you know, he's going to be a little bit forgotten maybe if we don't do something about it. So let's do our best to sell people on this guy.
Yep.
But yeah, quick disclaimer before we get started. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show, as always. That's not the only way you can play Exceed, and I recommend that if the lines of play that we're describing aren't fun or don't look fun to you, play the way that you want to play. You will have more fun that way. You will learn more in the long run that way. You'll play longer. We legally cannot stop you from playing the way you want to play. And uh, I think everybody could stand to enjoy Exceed a little bit more than they do. Uh, Disclaimer number two is that we tend to be pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show. Rose is going to give her rules for her strategy on Anji, and especially with a character this new and this I don't know if underdeveloped is the right word, but at least like unexplored. Right? Season
Yep.
season 7 came out in print like a week ago to Kickstarter backers. There has not been a lot of time to really, really delve into all of these characters. So if there's anything that we missed or anything that we underrepresented or misrepresented, or that you just think you have a different line of play that you'd like to share, we are definitely not saying that you are wrong. In fact, that we are saying that maybe, possibly, perhaps, maybe we could maybe be wrong a little bit, maybe. Don't tell anyone I said that, though. This is a definitive guide. Um, Last little bit about the disclaimer is if you are brand new to Exceed, first of all, welcome. Hope you enjoy your time in this community. If you have only ever heard of Guilty Gear Strive, the board game, and you hear me refer to it as Season 7, they're the same thing. If you hear us occasionally slip up and call Dust and Slash, Spike and Assault, they're the same thing. It's just cosmetic differences. Rose and I have been in the community for a little while, and we tend to refer to things by the names that we're used to. Um, but yeah, with all of that bookkeeping out of the way, Rose, tell me a little bit about Anji.
Great. Yeah, and that's a good call out about the normals and the terminology. Anji is, if you are familiar with him in Strive or Guilty Gear in general, he's what you'd expect. He's this kind of graceful dancer, martial artist, scholar character. He has this really interesting mix of offense and defense because he is trying to kind of, we'll get into this when we look at his ability in more detail, but he's trying to predict what the opponent's going to do. He's trying to counterattack. He's trying to stand in the right places to make his cards work. So rather than being a character that you just kind of run your own game plan, he's a pretty interactive character with the opponent.
Okay. So, and what everything that you just described, Rose, stand at the right ranges, guess what your opponent or predict what your opponent is going to do, set up your own strikes. What you're describing sounds like playing Exceed.
Yes,
Like
Anji plays Exceed.
yeah, plays Exceed real well. And it like so maybe it may be too early to say, but it is possible that if people are new to the game and are interested in picking up a character to really drill the fundamentals and figure out the fundamentals, he might be a good one to start with.
Yep. Obviously, the title characters like Sol and Kai, they're matchup against each other is the like canonical demo matchup.
Sure.
They are the most intended for new players, but I think Anji would be a great choice as well.
Okay, cool.
And he will actually teach you some. We'll jump ahead a little bit. This boost right here is pretty important for other older seasons of this game.
Oh yeah,
So,
people who've been playing a little while might recognize this boost by a different name. So hopefully, as we get into this stuff, if this happens to be the first guide that people are watching, I think a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing are probably going to be pretty applicable to other characters. So this may be one to start on. To you might get better at Anji listening to this guide, but you also might get better at your character too.
yep. And like fundamentals characters go, getting better at the game will also make you better at Anji. Like you have a lot of choices playing this character, and in this game, choices are where the skill like shines through, where you prove that you know what you're doing.
Right.
So if you have enough choices, it's easy to make the wrong choices.
Sure. Sure, yeah, and anything that can winnow down those choices is kind of a, on the one hand it can make it easier, on the other hand it can be sort of a limitation on skill expression.
Absolutely. Yep.
Interesting. All right, so we are predicting then pretty high ceiling for this character in terms of what you can do with him because of how many choices there are. That typically means and exceeds that that's a character that if you really kind of put your nose to the grindstone, you could get really good with Anji.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's why part of why I was so interesting that like this character is kind of underexplored.
Yeah.
So let's start with the actual ability to kind of justify some of what I'm saying. Here's your first choice. You're going to make this choice every single strike of the entire game. Sometimes it'll be relatively easy, but after setting your attack, you may spend one force, that is, discard a card from hand, or gauge, or hate force, however your character can do it. Get -1 speed and +2 guard, which is mostly going to work with your specials, because a lot of normals in this game don't really benefit from having 2 more guard and 1 less speed. It just kind of makes them worse for all of the unguarded normals.
Yeah, so these ones in particular, short of if you're fighting Cammy and you're dealing with a 2 power special, of which there are no normals. Like the weakest normal is 3 power. So 2 guard is not doing anything for you on its own most of the time.
Yep.
Okay.
So just in the simplest case where you play 1 card with no boosts, you're not going to want to use your ability with these.
Right.
Or probably not this one, probably not this one. Possibly these 2.
Yeah, so for Dust, it's like Dust loses combat all the time, even if it doesn't get stunned. Like having guard on top of it is unlikely to do very much to mitigate its worst cases. And then block is like you just drop a bunch of armor on it. You don't really care about the guard.
Yep.
Okay.
So what this ability is mostly going to work with are your character cards, which if you look at, all of them except this one have printed guard or armor, and this one actually does care about the ability as well. We'll get to it when we talk about the card.
Okay, and yeah, I see stun immunity on it, so it's not like it's defenseless. It just doesn't have a printed guard value. So we got 3, we got 4, we got 3, 3, 3. So typically, the number we're probably hitting when we spend our ability is 5.
Yep.
Okay.
Like you said, 6 in a couple of cases, but mostly 5.
Okay, yeah, and so and by the rule of thumb that I always use for guard values is like if you've got 4 speed and 4 guard, you're like safe-ish, short of weird stuff that your opponent can do. Like 4 and 4 is like all right. So if we're talking about 3 and 6, 5 and 5 is very very safe typically. 4 and effective 6, like so.
That is, you are forgetting the minus speed. That is a very important part of this ability.
I am forgetting the minus speed. It's almost as if I wasn't listening when you mentioned that literally just now. So actually, 4 and 5 still quite safe.
Yes, this is the one that you were thinking of when you're talking about that kind of very safe shape.
Yeah,
if you spend on this, these ones. That's the interesting thing about this kit is these cards are designed to make you make choices. Like. Here is this card. We're going to keep going back to this. This is Fujin. This is Anji as a character.
Okay.
If you're defending with this, you're always playing this mix-up. Is it slash or is it dive? Because you can beat either of them at will with this card, but you have to pick which one.
You have to choose. Interesting. Okay, so if I'm defending, I could outspeed dive without spending anything. I could outspeed dive and and stun it cleanly. Or I could
Yep.
spend for my ability, lower my speed enough that dive now cleanly beats me. Or at
Yep.
least I trade with it.
Yeah, at range 4 as
At range
you
4,
could.
yeah, at the very least, I would trade with it. But now I've got enough guard that and I'm doing more enough damage to trade up on assault and take advantage back.
Yep.
Interesting.
So for the most part, these cards are going to present you that choice. This is a one we just talked about. This is actually already at that speed 4 and 4 guard value, but you will things change that. Like people play power boosts. You need
Oh,
to
sure.
make choices sometimes anyway.
Yeah.
This one,
Our like bespoke training dummy over here is Ryu, who has a 4 power or 4 speed 6 power move just in his kit
yep,
natively.
yep.
So sometimes you need more.
This is a mid speed. It's range 3 because it's a dust spike like. You can make it speed 2 if you want to actually armor through something, but then it does a lot worse as a mid speed because now you're losing to like EX sweep or their opponent speed 3 mid speed.
Right. And doing this on defense would you would
Yeah.
lose to sweep without speed you at that point.
Yep.
Okay.
And then this is a pretty risky mid. I'd call it a mid-speed projectile. You can make it a slow projectile instead, because in the fireball meta, 5 guard is basically always enough
Right.
to beat a fast fireball, whereas 3 might not be. It'll depend on the fireball.
Right.
So yeah, you're going to have to make choices. And this ability is also another really important thing about it. The timing of this is after setting your attack, which makes it a lot better on defense than on offense. On defense, the opponent has already made their choice, and you now get to respond to it in either way you want.
Okay.
On
So
offense, you are revealing your plan. It's simple.
so I'm striking as Anji. I say, okay, Rose, I'm striking. I'm spending a force for my character ability. You have all of that information prior to making any decision on your part, and that's
Yep.
the reverse. And the reverse is true if Anji's defending.
Yep.
Okay.
So this is where we're going to start getting into my actual strategy. I will mostly use this ability on defense. When I use it on offense, it tends to be because I've found a checkmate or because I've exceeded.
Okay.
And let's talk about the exceed side. The exceed side has a kicker, which is what we call these immediate when you exceed effects. So it gives you a little bit of the economy back. It makes you strike immediately.
Right.
And it upgrades this ability to, instead of spending a force and losing a speed for 2 guard, you spend a force and lose the speed for 2 armor, which against most attacks is equivalent, except you'll be taking 2 less damage. Against some attacks, armor and guard work differently.
Sure. You got some things ignore armor but not guard, or vice versa. But most of the time, it's just like armor is just kind of better guard.
Yep.
Okay.
So when you exceed, this is I would argue this front side ability is pretty niche. When it's good, it's strong, and you should use it when it's strong. But you shouldn't expect to use it frequently. When you exceed, this ability becomes a lot more of something that you could just consider using like every strike if you want to be really crazy about it.
Right. Just
Problem is
having 2 armor is just like cool deltas. Let's just have a lot more sustain and let's just fight for way longer.
Yep.
Right.
So caveats to that: minus speed and spending a force both matter. You would like to get value out of this, but you will have to. You can't do it every single strike unless you are really in on your opponent not reading that. That's your plan,
Right.
because at some point it'll be predictable and you can just lose to, like, it doesn't matter if you have 2 armor on this Fujin if the dive cleanly dodges what you're doing.
Right. This is what you would play against the AI in browser exceed. Right. This is like
yes.
this is
If the opponent doesn't react at all, this is perfect.
This
is every time.
This is the numbers equal when my opponent is compliant with what I'm trying to do and is not playing to beat me. Answer. Is it only that, or is this something that you actually would do in like a game against an opponent who's trying to win?
I would do this sometimes in a game against the opponent who's trying to win. I will mostly lean towards not exceeding, but I think there is value to exceeding in the right situations.
Okay.
Um, so I was hoping I'm getting ahead of myself here. I was planning to talk about this ability at a really high level and then like actually show you the kit to justify why I'm saying the more in-depth stuff. So
Right.
I will zoom a little back out here.
Sure.
Both sides of this are worth considering. I will be evaluating the cards in the context that I mostly won't exceed, or if I do exceed, it'll be late in the game or in specific situations.
Right. And
Um,
and a second ago, Rose, when you said -1 speed and spending a force are a mitigating consideration against your exceed side ability, those are both there on your front side ability too. So even though we're not exceeding, and you said earlier that the ability is good when it's good, but it's not it's a sometimes food. It's not all you're not something you're doing every turn.
yes,
Uh, those same considerations. You don't want your -1 speed all the time. You don't want your 1 force all the time. But on front side, it's like less tempting. It seems
exactly.
like
That's why it's so interesting. Is this goes from a really niche ability that's strong sometimes to a pretty spammable ability that's really weak sometimes.
interesting. Okay, or that has really really serious drawbacks to it that maybe the spam ability masks. It hides it from you because it feels so good to just have armor.
Yes, exactly. So that's why it's an interesting decision. You will want to justify having spent that free gauge and having this new powerful ability. And armor is nice. It's nice to not take damage in strikes.
Right.
So if you exceed, you're probably on a game plan where you use this ability more, and that means you're going to be dealing with the drawbacks more as well as the benefits.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, let's talk about the actual kit. We kind of started off with Fujin, and we said I think there's a lot of things to say about Fujin because again, this is Anji's iconic. You spin at them, you do Fujin. Um, but that it is kind of the microcosm of the kit again. Like you are choosing when you play this on defense what you want to beat, and that's really interesting because most of the time cards in this game don't give you that option, and in this case, you do have to make that choice as like a read of your opponent. You don't get to choose reactively. That would be really, really crazy.
Sure.
But it's just very flexible because this card will function as both a pretty solid on curve poke, a fast, or even above curve because it hits at range 4, and it will also function as a very fast slow, sort of a very fast guarded option.
That also
Because
draws 1 and also gains advantage. So like no matter how you're using this card, it's good at its job. Like there are fast dives in the game that merely close to and probably hit for like 4. And
yeah,
don't draw
fast
you
dive is
1.
also usually in the territory of hitting for 3. 4 is actually makes a fast dive good.
Yeah, and most of them also don't draw you 1, also don't gain you advantage. So even in that kind of low damage use case where you're merely trying to stuff out a dive, the
Yep.
way you would with dive attack from beheaded or something, even then you're getting a lot out of it. And then if you decide to play the mid speed game, now you're hitting for more and you're still getting all of that benefit.
Yep. So this is pretty comparable, except like better in every way, except the 4 versus 3 power to slash.
Right.
This is close to hit gain advantage, except you also have some guard. If you do successfully counter hit, get some more power. On your hit, you draw 1. You have some extra range, and you have that flexibility we talked about.
Right.
So this card works at basically every range from 1 to 4. 2 is a little more niche, but at range 1, this will. At range 1, this is a really scary mid-speed sometimes. It beats exactly block. It does not do very well into anything else, but when you hit their block with slash, you're having a great time because now you got a gauge, they have to spend some force. It's your turn again. Don't play this card at range 1 very often, by the way. It's very tempting for me. I do it. It's never really a great idea. Here's a card you actually can play at range 1. Just play at range 1. It beats grasp, it beats cross. It will trade with anything slower, and it has the exact same situation against block, except now you even draw 1.
Right. Yeah, okay. And a lot of times like the sort of like half measure compromise for playing slash at range 1 is like you put faultless defense on it or something. And then you're kind of all in at that point, and it's often fairly telegraphed that that's what you're doing. With Fujin, you don't even need to worry. It's already doing everything you need Slash to do at range one without a cancel, without a boost that might tip your opponent off. It's just a thing you can do.
Yep. Notably, also beats cross, which even if you put discard on Slash, you won't hit the cross. You're just too short ranged.
Right?
But
Yeah.
if the opponent crosses at range 1, you actually get a really good trade into with Fujin.
Okay. So and is that also why it's a little bit less meaningful at 2? Because then they actually could cross out of it.
At 2, a pretty common mix-up is like, are they going for a cross? Are they going for a dust? Are they going for a focus?
Right.
Because cross beats dust, beats focus, beats cross.
Yep.
Well, tanks through most of cross's damage. Doesn't actually beat cross.
Right.
And this is a good card against dust, just by virtue of being
assault
curve option
or Slash. Yeah, sure. It gets you in. It gets in the range shadow.
But this is not an incredible card against focus. Like it trades, you get advantage. It's not the worst card against focus either by any means, but it's not. It's like a slightly negative trade into focus. And yes, actually not beating the cross feels bad when you could have beaten it if you were just one range closer.
Right. Makes sense.
At range 3, this is very comparable to Slash, except it has that special property on defense we talked about. And at range 4, this is a fast dive.
Right. Okay. And if they've got a fast fireball, it's even better. You trade up all the stuff that we've been talking about where it has this extra defensive utility by virtue of having guard.
Yep.
So are you pretty 50-50 on using this with your ability versus using it without it? Or is it just it's just kind of you look at your opponent's kit, you see what you're trying to beat, and you make the read?
I want to save that for when I talk more in depth about the ability. I will say mostly I use it without the ability, which will be true of most of these cards.
Okay. Makes sense.
Because I'll talk about the extra drawbacks of using the ability relative to not.
Sounds good. Okay.
So also, as I was saying, this is not the best trade into like sweep and focus. It is nice that you do get the trade, but it hurts, right? You're trading down 3, which is the amount that you normally lose and exceed strike by if you like grasp into a sweep or you get hit by their grasp.
Sure.
You have the draw 1 and the advantage, which are sort of compensating factors, and so if you expect to trade into a slow, like ideally play something that beats the slow, but if you are worried about trading into slow but feel like you should play this card anyway, you want to get value out of the parts of the card that you can get value out of.
Right.
In upcoming turns. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so I mean, if the thing that we're theming around is predicting your opponent's moves, this is something that can call out different things. If you call it out incorrectly and you do run into a counterattack, you're extra sad because you've also lost your Fujin, which is such a strong card.
Kind of. On one hand, yes, because Fujin is a really good card. On the other hand, this is like your least committal option because it's just always good, basically. Like you can make committal choices with it, but you don't have to. You can just play it and it will do something for you.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not like a command grab where you kind of like have the mind read on your opponent. This is just like, okay, I got my read wrong and still hit and got gauge and got advantage and drew 1.
Yeah, now I can try again, get a better read on the next strike.
Makes sense. Okay.
Situation.
Gotcha.
And like you were saying, this is a really cool card, so we have to be a little sad about using the boost, but this boost is actually also pretty useful. This is a cancelable boost that moves your opponent and gives you a little bit of power. And just any cancelable boost that moves either you or your opponent is going to have like a pretty high floor because you can use it to change the position and do something immediately.
Right.
I lean towards playing the attack because this attack is so good, but you have to be flexible because this boost is useful and sometimes you need it.
And looking at the rest of his kit really quick, I'm not seeing too many instances where +1 power is going to matter for like breakpoint math, but
yeah, notably for normals it does matter a little bit, right? Like sweep with +1 power
sweep,
is scary. Slash with +1 power now breaks the faultless or the dust,
and tons and tons of 4-guard specials littered throughout the game here and there.
Yep. And and sometimes +1 power on a 3 damage move is also relevant. But yes, this is going to be mostly the power is like a bonus that helps you get a little more damage, and it might make your normals interactions better more than really changing any of the interactions of cards in your kit.
Makes sense. All right, and so this is just like you you're winning the game in fewer strikes if you play this rather than you've overturned something.
Yep.
Okay.
So moving on to Ko, which is this, we call it a big Tatsu. It advances 3 and then hits range 1 to 2. So it doesn't actually hit at range 1 in a sort of neutral board state.
Yeah. Let me move our folks down a little bit here so we have some room.
Sounds good. So we are here and we advance 3, and now we advance 3 because we move past the opponent, and then we hit at range 1 to 2.
Right. So we're whiffing it. So it's basically it's like a 2 to 5 generally.
Pretty much, yep. 2 to 5 unless they are cornered, which is going to be a pretty important part of this card because this card gets a lot better when they're cornered, surprisingly. Unsurprisingly, perhaps. This card has enough guard that if you are in this sort of situation, most characters cannot do something really trivially to break it. So again, in the worst case, they might just play slow and you'll trade down, but in a lot of cases they don't play slow and you get a good trade.
Right. Okay. I mean 3 and 4 guard is not, as you said, not trivial to break is probably the way to put it. 3 and 6 is, or sorry, 2 and 6 is sweet.
Yep, 2 and 6 is yes, pretty safe. And this card I think has a little more reason. Like in practice, 3 and 4 is often just enough anyway, but this card isn't going to win cleanly, which is one of the things you lose when you give up speed value, is like you accept that you're probably not going to win cleanly. This card was never going to win cleanly. It's going down in speed doesn't matter unless it makes you lose cleanly.
It's not hitting hard enough, and honestly, like the big damage payout part of this card is only happening on counter hit anyway. You were never winning cleanly, or you're not getting the most value out of the card. So why, so losing that speed is not that big a deal, maybe.
Yep.
Okay.
So the force cost still hurts, but yeah, this card is pretty easy to say, okay, I'm going to spend 1 force and make this slower if you feel like it will help.
Sure.
Yeah. Again, I just want to say it one more time because it's a little unintuitive to me. It took me a bit to realize this. This card is really good when the opponent is cornered. It just beats or trades in the worst case with all of their options, except like they can dive past you, make the super risky call out, and then you'll still be at range 1 afterwards.
Right.
So this card benefits you cornering the opponent quite a bit. It is also, this is a more generalized use case, or this is the use case that's more obvious, but the one that will actually come up less often, I think, is that it's just a really good anti-fireball tool.
Oh, sure. The
reason it comes up less often is your opponent sees you have this and says, okay, I probably can't play a fireball. It just like automatically loses to go. But even then, it's stopping them from using some of their options.
I mean, if what you've done, if you have such a like how often has Ryu gotten the value out of Metsu Hadoken, or rather out of Hadoken, by making his opponent run in? Cool.
Yep.
You made him run in. That's, if you've got a handful of stuff that you can work with at range 1, you got your value that way. If all Ko is doing is keeping your opponent from throwing fireballs at you, well, now they're not throwing fireballs at you.
Yep. So this card is, good versus zoning, of course. If you want to make it a valuable attack in other matchups, pushing your opponent to the corner is a good way to do this. It is also a cross counter if you have that read.
Right. Okay.
Cross counters are very hype. This is not, we're breaking the thing about playing to win. Always play cross counters because when it works, it feels great.
It does feel great. And Fujin also a cross counter, but Fujin is Fujin and it's an everything counter. So
yes,
Ko having cross counter utility on top of all of its other stuff is actually kind of notable.
Yep. So this card is a little niche, as I was saying. That's how you make it less niche, but don't be too surprised that this card gets spent as force or used for, I would say used for its boost. The boost is also a little niche. Okay. This boost is good when you can get value out of the push. +1 speed is fine. Characters that have a lot of ways to get speed, each point of speed is nice because it's another point of speed the opponent has to deal with. You don't have that many ways to get speed.
Right.
This is like year 1, and it's slow, it's not cancelable, it's just 1 speed.
Right.
So it's also a little niche. The push effect can be helpful. Like if you have this on Fujin at range 4, now you beat sweep.
Sure.
If you have this on grasp at range 1,
At
now
range
you
one,
beat sweep.
totally. Yep. Yeah, you can make enough space to dodge a counterattack, and generally the thing that you're trying to dodge is sweep.
Yep. So that's when I would use the boost, is if I think that I can get value out of the push effect. Or this is a boost you can just kind of, if you don't have anything you really want to do, you can just play this boost and like get a little bit of incremental value. It's not exciting, but
Right.
it's there.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, both sides a little niche. Attack can be strong when it's good. Moving on to Nagia. This is a kick shape, actually. It's a weird kick shape because most kicks are speed 4 and push your opponent 2. This is speed 4 and you retreat 2. You like kick off of them instead of kick them away.
Hit retreat 2 after draw 2.
Yeah, everyone expects this to be the opposite.
Yeah.
You look at this card and it just feels intuitive that the hit should be the draw and the after should be the retreat. Nope,
Yeah.
It's hit, retreat, and after draw, which is actually kind of cool against zoning or stuff like that because you can just say, okay, I want 1 armor and draw 2.
You can
Sure.
empty.
You
can
hit
empty
me,
strike
but
on
I'm not
that turn.
retreating.
Interesting. Okay, so it actually has utility, even and like I assume that's not like you're not gunning for that position against a zoner, but if it's going to come up at some point, you're at range 3 pretty frequently.
Yep.
Okay.
This is also like if your opponent is going to cross out. If you are like versus, I don't know, a Sagat or something, right? And this was said always retreat 2, and you're in this board state, and you're like, okay, I want to play Nagia, but if he crosses, we'll be here, which means I lose the game.
Right.
Nagia doesn't say that. It says you're here, which is still not ideal versus Sagat, but like he has cross in his deck. It's going to happen eventually.
Sure.
It's not worse than anything else that would have lost to that cross.
Right.
This is another one of your kind of more masterable cards like Fujin. This card just kind of works. At range 1, it's a lot less appealing because now the retreat doesn't beat a sweep, it only beats a focus. But even then, beating focus is cool. You get this after draw. You are very rarely going to be stunned playing this card, so this draw is pretty reliable. And then it's a little bit of damage, a little bit of armor. It fairly often doesn't trade, so just a solid card. Not like something to write home about. It's dealing free damage. You can't be too happy to deal free damage, but it works. It's like kind of like another cross. It's just it's like a guarded cross. It's Anji's cross.
Having like what if cross drew 2? That seems pretty good. Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, having looking at his kit here, just kind of scanning ahead a little bit. I've got close 2, advance 3, retreat 2, push 1, may advance or retreat 1, close 3. Like he's got a huge amount of repositioning going on throughout his kit. He's on this boost that you were talking about, both these boosts we were talking about actually. He's moving his opponent and himself all over the place.
So notably in strikes, he moves pretty far. He's got this advance 3. Out of strikes, he's usually moving pretty short distances.
Like little steps, and then the more committal stuff is from the strikes, or the bigger steps are from the strikes. So, like I assume then, looking at the rest of his kit, one of the times that you would want to play Nagiha is when you're feeling like you want to threaten Fujin, or when you're feeling like you want to threaten Ko. Like sending yourself, sequencing your hand so that you are moving to a space where the rest of your threats are still online, given the fact that all of the stuff is moving him around, seems like something that you're going to want to do as Anji.
To some extent, because like that is something that helps aggressive characters in Exceed a lot in general, is like you're saying, if you're sitting here at range 1, you're striking. Eventually, you run out of good cards to hit with at range 1. If you're like dancing around, you're like, now I'm striking with a range 3 card, now I'm striking with a cross, now I'm striking with a range 4 card. It lets you use up all the cards in your hand for value more easily.
Okay.
That said, you are a little close ranged. This retreat 2 is a little position negative, not too much, because you have a good anti-fireball tool. You have all this little short movement. You've got the fast dive. 4 is a good range for you. Past 4. Not so much. Past 4, you have I have this lack of mix-up with this. This hits at range 5, but nothing else will.
Right. It's color.
So it'll get me back in. Yep, it'll get me back in, but I'm probably trading down.
Right.
So yeah, this is why it's nice. This is a retreat 2 instead of crosses retreat 3. Is you'll end up at range 4, which you are pretty happy about. You don't have a great mix-up at range 4. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you have some mix-up range for it, and you have all these ways to move terrain tree, where suddenly you have a good mix-up.
Okay.
Um, So this is also draw two. Draw two is a really good thing to put on a card. Like this just lets you keep up pressure pretty well. Like your opponent needs to be prepping. You just throw Nagiha. That's your prep. Now you hit them again.
Right.
And yeah, this card is like a workhorse. It's not like super exciting, but it will always do something good.
Right.
This boost is another one of your little micro movements. Here is close one. You may draw one or strike, so you can close one, draw one more friend of turn, which is useful sometimes, but I often like. It feels a little bad to use up this boost that way when you have a lot of other ways you can move one. Admittedly, compressing your movement is more exciting if you do something with the compression rather than just draw an extra card. But
right.
Neutral is good.
It's like the prepare action is utility value aside is clearly the least exciting action in Exceed. Having close one and then prep is way less cool than close one and then strike.
Yeah, but it is useful. Don't get me wrong. But yes, by and large, I'm using this as a close one and strike because it gets you just like your opponent has to worry about you always being one range closer and immediately doing something.
Right.
This does not cost a gauge, unlike your cancelable ways of moving. Right. This is just an instant boost.
And that means that we cannot take other actions out of our boost other than striking, except if we cancel into it. So,
that doesn't tend to be too much of an issue for Anji, just because your other things you'd want to do are cancelable, so you can just order it differently. But yes, you do have to be aware of that sequencing.
Right. So you could Zessen if you need to strike at range 2, and you're saying, all right, Zessen +1 power, pull 1, close 1, strike. That's a reasonable sequence you can do with one cancel as Anji.
Yep.
Okay.
So, again, I lean towards Nagiha just because it's a really Nagiha is just a really like solid card, but you have to be flexible, and this will be kind of a theme because you have a lot of different ways to do this little short movement and then strike. You're gonna have to use some of them. The question is just like which one is best at the moment.
So these three boosts are analogous in a couple of different ways. Like this one is the odd one out because it's not cancelable. But
this one gives you armor and guard. This one moves yourself. This one moves the opponent. They're all a little different. They're all helping you play neutral.
Right. And because you're a Guilty Gear character, frequently your neutral is going to end in you punching your opponent.
Neutral it might be better to say neutral skip. This is you spinning at your opponent and you're saying like, what are you going to do? I'm running at you. I'm going to throw an attack.
Right.
So yeah, you'll need to be flexible because you need to get this movement and strike from somewhere, probably.
Right. So whether it's coming from Zessen, whether it's coming from these other boosts whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce and embarrass myself, the boost on Nagiha, the boost on Rin.
Yep.
Use
There's
one of them.
Trade-offs to which one you use. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Speaking of trade-offs, I guess I may as well just like talk about him. This is Fujin. This is a great card. You're sad to lose it. This is Nagiha. This is a solid card. It's not as exciting as Fujin, but the boost is a little cheaper.
Right.
So you're not excited to lose it. You're a little happier to lose it than Fujin, but you're also a little more inclined to lose it.
Right. So Nagiha is you would lean slightly more towards using Nagiha as a strike than using its boost. But if it's a fight between I need to make one space of movement and it's going to be from this or from this, it's probably going to be from this.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, sure. Makes sense.
And then another short movement, which I may as well just talk about at this point. And I'll start with the boost because we kind of continue that theme.
Yeah.
This is your short movement again. This one has really nice 1 armor and 1 guard is probably the best of these stat lines for you because all your attacks get way better with 2 more guard. This is a way to do it without losing a speed and spending an extra force.
Oh, sure. And I guess conceivably you could put it on, you could do both. Now you got 4 effective guard on a normal. But if you were going to do that, you could also just Faultless Defense.
Yeah, I mean, they're both real options. They are both super real options. But yeah, so this is your really solid neutral movement tool again. This one is giving up a mid speed, which On one hand, people value mid speeds a little lower in this game. There's just kind of the community bias, I think.
Right.
On the other hand, if you give up all your mid speeds and you like this boost and you like flawless defense, because again, your attacks get way better with just a little bit more guard.
Yeah.
Then you don't have a mix up anymore. So that's the trade off for this one: is do I want to spend my mid speed? Do I want to spend my range 1, ignore armor, and guard?
Right.
And this one,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
I don't know. Go for it.
The thing I was going to ask is frequently when stuff like this comes up is like you have your command grab, you have the thing that is keeping your opponent from mashing sweeper focus at range 1. You might boost your first copy of this, but be a little careful losing your second copy of Rin, because if you don't have this, now suddenly their play pattern is freed up. Is that the kind of thing that Anji is going to do as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. You have some flexibility because this is a boost that says like, okay, maybe I can get to range 2, and now I'm threatening dust instead. So like you have the flexible movement. You don't have to be completely. Some characters have to be a lot more aware of this than others. I think Anji's in the middle. Anji, yes, the second copy of Rin is a really good thing to keep live.
Right.
So this is a pretty solid range 1 mid speed. It has this guard. It does still lose to the normals that are useful at range 1 defending against mid speeds.
Right, you just throw them. Yeah, grasp range 1 doesn't matter if you didn't get stunned. You're also not hitting.
Yep, but against a lot of character specials, this will actually beat their fast, which is cool.
Or even like a situation.
Yeah, in some
like,
board states, like now
like
that
this,
grasp doesn't work.
Grasp can't get out. Cross can't get out here. Yep. Okay, makes sense.
So, but it's a mid speed. Let's talk about the actual win condition. This is just like a 4 damage spike at range 1 to 2 when it works against the slow, which is cool. That's a lot of damage. That just wins strike automatically if they're slower than you. And this card is, funnily enough, this is one of the ones that you might spend on more often, even though it doesn't change the fast interactions, because in late game scenarios when the deck is pretty depleted, spending on this can set up a checkmate. Like we are here, and the opponent has, I don't know, every one of these cards except Dust and Dive. If I spend on this card, nothing beats it. If I don't spend on it, they might hit me with a slash and then just break the armor. But so you can see little situations like that, and because it's an ignore armor, ignore guard option.
And this is, would you say that this is kind of how you're going to evaluate using your, I know that we're skipping ahead again, but is this kind of how you would be using your ability in general, that you are looking for, again, it's not mashable. It's not something that you're doing all the time. You're looking for justifications like that to use your ability, and this is one of the big ones for Rin.
Kind of. Not, yes, that doesn't encapsulate all of the ways you use your ability, but this is definitely one of the ways that's nice, is like, do I spot something that just always works?
Right.
Because if so, yeah, spend that force, get something that works.
Right. And I mean, going back to something that you said earlier, that you are more of an advocate for spending this on defense. Maybe don't do that with Rin, because now you're losing cleanly to sweep.
Yeah, yes. Rin on defense, you probably do not spend for Rin on defense very often at all.
Right, okay.
But yeah, but it's the one that you actually might spend for on offense most often for those checkmate situations. So trade-offs.
Right, sure. And then obviously, if you're only ever spending for offense on offense for Rin, rather, maybe mix it up occasionally, because your opponent will notice that and will just be like, that's Rin. Okay, cross.
Well, I wouldn't spend on it when it's a mix-up, because they don't actually even need to notice it's Rin. If you spend on offense here, cross beats everything except Ko.
Right, yeah, they don't actually care at that point. So if you're already in the checkmate situation, you're spending because it's a checkmate, not because it's a mix-up. I get you.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I will throw this out as a mix-up, absolutely, but you don't need to spend on it in that case. It probably wouldn't.
Right, sure.
And then, again, same as these two, you need to be flexible because this is your movement. But this one, like you said, probably spend one of these boosts pretty highly, and then the second boost you're much more hesitant to spend.
Right. Makes sense.
This is, I'm going to call this my first hot take of the guide. I don't know if that's true or not. This card is better than it looks. People think this card is really bad. This card's okay.
We just go over and get Skyfangs really quick from Linne.
Yeah, free power, free guard, projectile. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
you just
Free
like
effect.
I think you just like defensive projectiles.
Look, this is an offensive projectile. This one's
Okay,
gain advantage.
that's a good point. All right.
Um,
So Skyfangs, because it's Linane, you're always spending for advantage. All
all right,
right, I'll stop
I,
giving you guff.
mm,
I'll stop.
I know. I actually like, deeply think about that. That raises concerning prop points. But anyway, yes, this card, Shitsu. Uh, this is it is speed 2. And a lot of these projectiles are speed 3, right? Like compare it to the first Jin card that we're going to pull out this guide. This his fireball,
Ice Blade, sure.
Ice Blade. Yeah, and then like I think a reason that people look at this card and say this card is bad is this card will never beat Ice Blade. It can't do it.
Right.
All right, maybe that's not actually true at range 4 if you spend for force, but it's not good at beating Ice Blade because it's slower, because the guard value on it is kind of low. I will say a lot of the times cards like these, if they get hit, they're losing anyway. Like this is your move don't move mix up as Jin.
Right.
If you play this and they dive you, you lose. If you play this and they dive you, you lose. Right. If you play either of these and they play a slow, you're pretty happy about either one. So like I think it fills a lot of the same purposes despite the stats on it reading a little worse.
Yeah,
it's actually pretty rewarding.
You don't actually need the the fact that it is a statistically worse version of a card or a comparable but lacking version of a card, it's still filling the same use cases.
Yep.
Okay.
And I actually would argue that the reward Ice Blade is maybe not the best example for this, because the reward in Ice Blade is also pretty high. The reward on this is pretty reasonable. You deal free damage, which your opponent didn't hit you back when it worked. You get advantage, you get the draw, you get flexible movement. Ice Blade, again, really similar. You get a little bit of free damage, you get some flexible movement, you get draw. This one gives you advantage, this one gives you different movement shape.
Right.
But I would say they serve similar purposes. And you can also use this as like a really brave range 3 mid speed. I think it's funny. I think absolutely you should do that sometimes, but probably not as often as I will.
Just retreat out of range of Spike, kind of like you would with Nagiha.
Out of sweep.
Sweep, yeah.
Spike beats it.
Yes.
Which is the problem.
Yes, okay.
But it's there, it exists. And then the one thing that's a little sad about this movement is if you are playing at range 4 and the opponent sweeps, well then you don't really have that big. The movement is a little less flexible than it looks because you're not going to walk into the sweep,
and you don't really
probably aren't going to go to range 5.
Yeah. So really, you're staying where
you're hoping they focus.
You
if they play focus, you're pretty happy because now you have a good choice.
Right. And I mean, like not moving at all is fine, but you mentioned a couple times now that you have quite strong range 3 mix-ups, and this is probably a range that you'd prefer to be at. So setting this range from range 4 is strong for you, especially with.
I don't even know if that might not. Range 3 and 4 are both pretty good for you, and neither of them are completely dominating for you. So I think it's more of a choice about your hand,
okay,
or about like what your immediate plan is,
sure.
or your opponent.
Sure, that makes sense.
Just putting movement on an exceed card, flexible movement on an exceed card, is like a pretty tried and true way to make it better.
Right. Okay. And any particular use case for this at range 2?
Not a sane one. You can beat specials with this at range 2 sometimes.
Right. So
I wouldn't go for it.
This is one of those ranges that's really there to like make a wild swing range more consistent or something.
Yeah, or if they assault for some reason during this don't move mix up, you still hit them. Something like that.
Try to dodge the dive. Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my hot take. This card is better than it looks. I still don't think this card is great. This is a mix-up option. This is not something you just throw out without thinking about it.
Right.
And also, this is how you beat slows at range 4, which makes it a little telegraphed. Like it is a mix-up, right? You have the move don't move mix-up just like any other character that can close in or not.
Right.
But if you are striking at range 4, it makes your opponent wonder, like, Anji should know that if I just play a slow, I beat everything but Shutsu. Is Anji playing Shutsu?
And in order to make that be relevant in their minds, you do need to play it.
Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, just like it's a mix up. I would say it's maybe a little more telegraphed that you're going for Shitsu if you are going for it. But I mean, it's perfectly viable to just be like, I'm going to play Fujin and get advantage and start the game
Right.
that way. So yeah, it's just a mix up.
Right.
Um,
And that's less to do with Shitsu being bad and more to do with your opponent thinking, well, they're not going to play Fujin turn 1 and not get full value out of it.
yeah, sometimes. Or like again, just like dive, ko, Fujin, they all lose to slows. And
Right.
people don't really like playing cards turn 1 that lose to slows.
Right.
Sometimes people dive in. Anji's not a grappler. Anji doesn't need to be at range 1 that badly.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
So probably you'll see this card more often as its boost because this is a really solid boost. This is better in 2 ways than a boost that a lot of people get, which is now draw 2 hit gain advantage, and that was before cancels existed.
Yeah.
This is now draw 2 after gain advantage, and it has cancelable. So this boost is very solid. This is the like niche version of the card versus the generalist version of the card.
Okay, so you use Shitsu when it's good. You use Okizeme whenever you want because Okizeme seems pretty good.
Yep. Something that I think about Okizeme is I think canceling it is great when it gets you value. When you can like, oh, I see I have a checkmate in 2 turns because I can gain advantage and do something and then do something else, or like, oh, I really need to do something right now.
Right.
I would argue that a lot of time you don't want to cancel this boost because it makes the economic value that much worse. Because like this could be a draw 3 after advantage, or it could be draw 2, spend a gauge after advantage.
That makes sense. Okay. So you would advocate canceling for it when canceling for it is it when you said getting value, that value does not mean that you gained advantage. That was probably going to happen anyway. But
yes,
if you can use your advantage in a way that will advance your win condition substantially enough that the cancel was worth it, that's when you cancel.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
One notable thing is like this is a really good card. This already says gain advantage on it. So
right.
If you're going to strike with Fujin, then you just cancel this to draw 2.
And canceled it to draw 2 and made them say, "Oh, it'll never be Fujin."
That's true. That is.
Listen,
that is true.
Rose, I'm looking for use cases here. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to be devil's advocate.
You don't have to look too hard. This, like, I think.
Yeah.
It took me a while to decide that I don't want to cancel this because canceling this is just on the face of it pretty strong.
Right.
Like draw 2, gain advantage, do something right now. It's a strong boost.
It seems ridiculous, and then you're like, wait, but then I'm spending a gauge.
It seems ridiculous, and it is ridiculous. I think it could just be even more ridiculous when you don't cancel it because it's still better than the version that everyone else gets, which is now draw 2, hit, gain advantage, even if you don't cancel it, and then you have the option to cancel it when it's good.
Right. Okay.
So, that's the specials, and then ultras. This is your cheap ultra, which is like parry counterattack. You need to get hit first for this to work.
Right.
And it does 6 damage, which is simultaneously the most damage of any card in your kit, and also like a little low for something you're spending 2 gauge on and getting hit when you for it to work. Like you could just play a sweep, and that would deal 6 damage as well.
Right, and now you're up 2 gauge, and in fact you've actually the close 3 might be more valuable to you, but sweep has its economic advantage on top of it too.
Yep. So it's kind of like, when do you want to play this card? When the things that make it better than sweep matter. When the stun immunity matters. When the fact that it hits 1 to 5 matters. And this card is a little better than it looks because free speed is like scary, right? Like, what if my opponent sweeps me? I won't get the counterattack. Because you can slow it down. This is the case where slowing it down actually makes it better. You can make it 2 speed, and now they need to play like exactly focus into you for you to not get the counterattack.
Defensive Kachifugetsukai is outsped by your opponent's initiating sweep, and you would prefer that because you need to get hit first for this. That's interesting.
Yep. So, I would say this card pairs really well with the character ability for that reason, and that this card pairs really well with the Exceed side for that reason, because this is a relatively cheap ultra. This goes from being the 6 delta, which is like a little underwhelming for what you're paying, to 8 delta, which is like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty happy to spend 2 gauge for 8 delta.
Right, but
If it's reliable like this.
it is 2 gauge and a force, which is still probably a pretty real cost. But that -1 speed is actually working in its favor for this.
Yep.
Interesting.
So yeah, super reliable, fairly cheap. If you do exceed, pretty strong. If you don't exceed, again, stun immunity and range 1 to 5 are useful things for a card to have.
Right. Okay.
Even if it's a little niche.
But if you're at range 1 to 3 and are, unless you're super worried about being spiked out or something and you dusted out and you need that initiated speed. Well, no, it doesn't even work because then you'd outspeed the dust and not hit for anything. If you're where sweep is good, you can probably just play sweep, basically.
Yeah, depends on the opponent. Right,
Okay.
like this beats all the Rins in the world, all the range 1 mid speeds. We'll trade with them.
Sure.
It's not a great trade, but it's better than losing.
Stun immunity, yeah. So what I should have said there is just a recitation of a recodification of what you said. You use it where sweep is good, and you don't care about the stun immunity.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You use sweep.
You use sweep
where sweep is good, and you don't care about the stun immunity. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is an ultra, so it's 2 force. I'm just going to lead with that instead of the boost to make people mad. 2 force is cool.
It's
true. You can move 2 with it. You can spend it for block, get 4 armor. It also has a boost reading on it from the earlier seasons of this game, which is the whole thing. I am not going to go in-depth on reading in this guide. I'm not the right person to do that.
Right.
But this is reading that doesn't use a card that's as good as focus. So this is better reading.
True. Even though it's an ultra, it's still not as good as focus.
Yep. Except when you're paying force, I would rather have focus in this card.
Right. Sure. Makes sense. And so, as a brief, people have never seen reading before. It is this card. It is to some players meta defining. To other players, it is the thing that you don't do because focus is your best normal. There's a lot that can be litigated about the discourse around reading.
Yep.
It is a card that people feel strongly about, and it is a boost that can win and lose games for you if you play it right. It's also almost definitely beyond the scope of this guide. At some point, I will probably pin somebody down and make them explain reading fundamentals to me for a long time.
You should do that, and it should be someone better at reading than me. But I will say, I will talk about the basics of it. This makes the opponent play this anti-reading minigame versus you. They can't keep known normals in their hand, because when you keep known normals in your hand against a character with reading, sometimes that just means you lose a strike.
Sure. So you the canonical version of this that everybody except for season 6 characters has access to is parry. If you whiff a parry, you have hand information, and then they say, okay, I change cards this and this and this, because those were the 3 normals that were in my hand, and now you can't read me anymore.
Yep, or maybe I have to parry back your reading because I don't want to be read, but I like the norms, mate. Like it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And it also reading, I think, unfortunately, in my opinion, reading I think can be pretty strong when you're just using it as a Hail Mary. Yep. This gives you that option.
Yep.
That option matters.
It's used as a mitigator for stat bonuses. My opponent says, all right, I've invested everything I've got in this strike. I'm Ryu. I've got Way of the Warrior and defensive down. I'm at range 2. I'm going to donkey kick. And Anji's like, okay, reading grasp. And if you got it, then you probably just won the game off of that read because Ryu invested so much into that strike.
Yep. So we'll keep it to pretty much that. Reading is an immensely powerful boost. There are things that rein the power in, like the fact that you have to make the call right, the fact that you're spending a good card. Even though this card's not as good as focus, it is still an ultra, which is like fairly useful.
Right.
But yeah, this is just something very powerful to have. You're unique in the Guilty Gear season that you have this, which also means I'm still trying to figure out the right way to be polite about this, to be nice about this in games, warn my opponent that reading is a thing that I can have before I do it.
Right.
But a lot of times people don't expect you to have reading because you are a Guilty Gear character, so you could just win for free if you want to.
Right.
In those cases,
and that works one time, and then they're going to be afraid of reading for the rest of their career as an Exceed player.
Yeah, possibly. So This was pretty matchup dependent, I would argue, because sometimes this ultra is exactly what you need. You just need like a stun immune option that gets you in.
Sure.
Or either half of that might be enough to make you play it as the ultra.
Yeah,
Other times reading is
I
really
mean,
strong. Other
if
times
you
force is strong.
if you've got a life lead, Kachifugatsu Kai might actually just be a checkmate.
Yep. This is very useful late game when you, or not even late game, just if you are up ahead, as you said, up ahead in life. This
Right.
card will almost always trade, and almost always trade at worst evenly.
Right. Sure. Makes sense.
This is the ultra that I am actually really excited about. This is the 3 gauge ultra, and like look at that stat line. It's so cool. It's 1 to 3, 3, 3, 3, 3.
Draw 3. Opponent must discard three cards.
Yep. So this is a slow. This
it.
is speed 3 and 6 effective guard, which makes it a little safer than sweep.
Right.
And it is a slow with really high economic value, but a little low damage, like delta damage and armor value.
Right.
For what you're paying for it. That said, it is still 6 delta, it's 3 power, 3 armor, and yeah, this economic value is amazing. This card says, like, I'm going to hit you, we're going to trade at worst evenly, and then I'm going to draw 3 more cards, so like a prep and a half, you're going to lose 3 cards, and you probably have to, that really pushes you to now, instead of doing neutral, you have to make hard choices about which cards you can afford to lose. You bleed information because I see those cards in your discard.
Right. Discarding 1 card is like, okay, that sucks, I guess. With sweep, it might be a really good card because you're not choosing it. As soon as you get into like, I'm making you discard 3 cards, all right, card 1 and card 2 are the cards I didn't care about. And now they have 2 more cards in hand, and one of them is really good. And both of them are really good, and they have to actually decide now.
Yep.
Okay.
So this card is going back to like, as Anji, you get rewarded for making these callouts on defense. This card is really good on defense because everything that we just talked about happens, and now it's your turn.
Right. Okay.
But on defense, you are risking losing to Spike now, or Dust, as well as the dive that you would lose to an offense.
Right. Okay.
For similar reasons, you can pair it with this boost and get advantage. Now it's your turn. You've drawn like 5 cards over 2 turns, possibly over 1 turn if you canceled.
If you discarded
3.
Right.
It's your turn. And this is your other way to convert gauge into armor. This is...
Oh, okay. So it's
kind of a tough question, like how to compare these rates, because this is 3 gauge, and then after that, each force is 2 armor. This is 3 gauge for 3 armor up front.
Right. Okay. But 1 time, obviously.
Well, 1 time per time that you play this card, right? You can play this up to 4 times if you really wanted to.
If the
opponent.
That
actually, you can get the gauge.
This may be the right time to ask this question, and if you're going to cover it later, I apologize, and we can certainly delay on it. So, in your view, Anji's Exceed mode is maybe not something you go for very often. I'm sure we're going to get into that. Anji's Ultras are useful utility cards, but not necessarily, game defining cards, I guess I should say. But
I would say this one is game defining. This is what I want to spend my gauge on.
Okay, so this is your preferred gauge payout then.
This and cancels.
Okay. And cancels in neutral, cancels as part of your pressure, and it seems like you got a lot of good neutral tools as Anji, so that's gonna eat up quite a bit of it. So one thing that I have noticed is Anji has good movement. He has very good card draw, especially with this card involved. How is his gauge generation? Is this something that I'm going to be struggling to play multiple times a game, or am I generating enough gauge that this actually is feasible to hit with this once, maybe twice, cancel as well a few times? I
have played a game where I've hit with this like 3 or 4 times, possibly.
Wow. Okay, so my budget is not
gauge generation is really good because you have these like this is a guarded fast dive. This card will almost always get you gauge. This is a kick. This will almost always get you gauge. This is, if you can set the situation up, this will almost always hit in the corner.
Okay, so it's not like a bespoke gauge generation tool. It's just that your cards are good and solid and easy to hit with.
Yep, and you have good neutral, and you're needing to be aggressive, so you will just like go to a range and play an on-curve card a lot of the time is the thing that you do, and that gets you more gauge.
Okay, so
you like both boosts in Season 7 that give you gauge, or all 3 actually. These are all good boosts for you. This is even more neutral option. This is power that you need and gauge. This is guard that you quite like. Or in the worst case, you get some gauge out of it.
Right. Okay. So you have a lot of gauge. You are incentivized to crutch on your gauge generation tools among the normal boosts pretty well. Your payout options, especially if you're leaning towards this one, it's not a situation where, okay, I could afford to hit this ultra 4 times a game, but after 2 times they're dead. They're not dead. This does 3 damage. Your damage seems a little bit low across the kit in general. The game might be long enough that you're hitting a lot, but you might be generating enough gauge that way too.
Yep.
Okay.
I will say you have this kind of pattern in Guilty Gear characters that it's hardest to get your first bit of gauge because that's when your neutral's really relatively weak. You have some ways out of that. You have like just striking with Fujin. You have boosting this to get some surprise initiation ranges.
Right.
But yeah, getting your first gauge can be a little hard. Once you have gauge, you are making a lot of gauge as this character. I think it would be viable to stay front side and boost this a lot, or play this a lot. I think it would be viable to flip and use gauge to spend for this. I think it would be viable to flip and play this card multiple times, possibly.
Right.
So you make a lot of gauge throughout the game.
Okay. And it seems like a lot of force too. Like you're drawing a lot of cards in general. Your economy seems quite good.
Yep.
Okay.
That is why I will lean towards a fairly aggressive style of Anji, because you get all this gauge and force. You probably have a higher tempo than the opponent when you want to.
Okay.
So.
And in your estimation, that gauge and force is better spent towards payouts like changing cards aggressively or like cancelable movement boosts or something, rather than your character ability or exceed ability most of the time.
Yeah, cancelable boosts and ultras for the most part, but yes, as well you can spend it for force or for what was the other thing you said?
So I was because the character ability doesn't cost gauge necessarily. It costs but
force.
You
could spend force to do it.
Yep. Yeah, you could be changing cards out of your hand to dig for options or something, and if you're playing aggressively, that might actually be something that you're willing to do.
Yep.
Okay.
Like you pointed out, you just have a lot of draw on your cards, so I think that generally you don't need to change cards out of your gauge to draw, just because you have enough. But like, getting in situations where you have no cards in hand and you need to are really bad situations. So definitely don't like rule it out as a possibility.
Sure.
If it gets you out of that.
Makes sense.
Speaking of getting situations where you have no cards in your hand and your opponent's just like striking into you, Anji is good at advantage chaining between Fujin and either side of this card. It's not hard to play this card. Hopefully, maybe you get an advantage that turn, maybe play it on defense. Maybe your opponent actually does get the prep afterwards, but now they've given up their crafted hand for like 2 cards off of their deck.
Right.
And now you just strike into them a bunch of times. That's one of the ways you get a lot of value as this character, I think.
Okay, so this is deceptively strong, despite the fact that it's medium delta for 3 gauge. Like, you actually are getting a lot of economic value, and it has to do with how much economic value you already have in your kit.
Yep. And also, like, this stops you, even if you aren't getting that immediate, like, I'm going to now strike following this, even if you have to, like, play some neutral or whatever.
Right.
Your opponent does have to draw cards to make up for those 3 that they lost. Like,
right.
This is time that they are not playing neutral and you are.
And your neutral's good. And you can set up dangerous things for your opponent quite quickly and quite effectively in that turn or 2 that you have.
Sort of. Your neutral is good. You don't do setups as much as, like, you don't have light, you don't have fierce, you have the season 7 boost kit, you have these cancelable relatively small boosts.
Right.
So it's more about, like, honestly, it probably is about striking a lot of the time because you've drawn 3 cards. You might be over your hand limit now. It's about, but yeah, you can get stuff done with that time.
Right. Okay.
Whether it is going to ranges that matter, striking, etc. So timing this attack is a pretty important part of playing it, because making your opponent discard 3 cards of their choice when they're at 7 cards in hand is pretty underwhelming. Making your opponent discard 3 cards of their choice when they have like 4 or fewer cards in hand is amazingly strong.
Yeah.
So you need, if your opponent is just keeping a relatively full hand, that probably means they're not doing anything too threatening, and you should be using your cancels to put pressure on them. If they have to respond to your pressure by starting to spend resources, that's when you can use this card for value.
Okay, and then they're at 0 hand size or very
And then you
low
go back
hand
to
size at
canceling
least,
and
and
taking advantage of.
now you play okay, and now you're able to do all that stuff even more freely because they're not doing as much to stop you, or because they can't do
Yep.
stuff to stop you. Okay,
Yep. So yeah, it's kind of a flow between, yeah, find the opportunity to play this when it actually hurts the opponent.
makes sense.
The draw free and the armor both are good too. Like you can just, if this card is going to hit and you're like, well, I'm about to get hit reasonably hard and I need some cards, even if they're a relatively full hand,
Right.
well, now you're the one at the full hand and they're not. So it's still not bad. But I would ideally play this when it sets my opponent to a really limited hand size.
Right, that makes sense. You also mentioned, and again, I think this might be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. You also mentioned that you would be playing this, 4 times a game or something.
That was an unusual game, but I will play it 2 a game or more.
Okay, and is Anji's card draw enough that you are probably planning on, and his damage might be low enough that you're probably planning on reshuffling over the course of a game?
Probably,
Okay.
yes. And it also helps you like keep this option live that we talked about. Like you need mid speeds
Right.
the way we're playing.
Right.
Slows are pretty scary for you. You
Okay.
need to find a way to beat them. You have ways to beat them. You have advantage chaining. You have mid speeds. You have doing stuff while they don't have the options. But you do need to like actually take advantage of that.
Right. So. I gotcha.
This boost is also pretty interesting. This card is like this card. The 2-gauge ultra. I'm like, this attack is good but situational. This boost is very strong but situational. 2 force as well is
right.
useful, but
it's useful.
You're
yeah.
throwing away the other parts of it. This ultra is like this attack I want to play. This is like half the reason I'm playing Anji.
Okay.
And then this boost is really surprisingly good for a lot of reasons. And I will actually argue that one of the less intuitive reasons I think is the one I value highest. But this boost looks at the top card of your opponent deck, hit, add this to gauge, cancelable. So there are a couple of different things you can do with this. You set up this scare quotes guaranteed scramble. You look at the top card of their deck, and then you scramble, and then you win the strike.
Right.
This costs you both these good cards and 2 gauge, and you better hope that the card you saw is a card you can actually beat, or else you just use this card and now you're like, okay.
And you're like, all right, I know what the card that I'm going to lose to is.
Yeah. And you do also want to beat this card for like enough value to make this worth it. Like if you see a cross on top of their deck and you just have Ko in hand, you can trade with the cross, but I wouldn't spend all of this resources to trade up 6 to 3 and they hit me and get a gauge during it.
3 force to trade is bad already, but 3 force on focus and Isaogi seems like a lot. That seems like a tough sell.
So Guaranteed Scramble, I'm not going to lie and say it's not strong though. Like it does when you see it, when you see the top card of the deck is sweep and you just have a slow in your mid-speed in your hand and you're like, okay, I guess I just beat their sweep this turn.
Right.
That's great. But you need to be flexible to like if you boost this and you're like, I need to find something that I can beat with Scramble, you're probably not going to be thrilled every time.
Right. Yeah. I have lost enough. I've lost enough strikes to a Scramble to know that sometimes a good card comes out off the top of your opponent's deck that you couldn't beat no matter what you played.
Yep. This also sets up the threat of reading again, because if this top card of the deck is a normal, again, like an if the top card deck is normal, now it's on top of their deck, and most characters will have to draw it at some point.
At some point, sure.
So it does need to be a normal you can beat. They do need to draw it at a time you can beat it. There are lots of little conditions on this, but it's still just like winning a strike automatically is a really strong thing in this game. And sometimes this wins you a strike automatically.
Right.
I'll say the hit effect in this card is like a shockingly large part of the value. This goes to your gauge, so you can just boost this on neutral sometimes. It's not ideal because like if you don't hit, there's a chance you won't hit afterwards. But especially if you have some gauge to play with, you can boost this in neutral. If these options are good, you have them. If not, this is a card that you just go to your gauge and now will fuel your Season 7 cancels engine.
Right. And it's 2 force engage, which is, I mean, not for a lot of your particular force costs, but having 2 force is nice to have it in the bank.
Yep.
Okay. But it sounds like you are playing the attack, or you're excited to play the attack much more frequently than you're excited to play the boost.
Yeah, I think when I play the boost most is Actually, probably in that situation I said is a little niche. Is like it's really early game. I don't have my first gauge yet. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get my early gauge. Boost this then, especially if you can threaten reading. That makes your opponent pretty paranoid. They're like, okay, maybe I have to parry this 2 gauge ultra. Maybe
Right.
I don't know. And now you get a hit and you get your second gauge, and that was a big deal for you getting from 0 gauge to 2 gauge because now you can do 2 cancels. You can just keep. Once you have gauge, you're strong.
Yeah.
But yes, I am leaning very heavily towards this attack. I will use this boost, but I'm sad about it every time.
Makes sense. Okay. You've successfully sold me on the 3 gauge 1 to 3 3 3 3 3 3 draw 3 discard 3. I assume you would never ever spend for force for your character ability on this, because then it's a 1 to 3 3 2 3 5. Those
there's not much point.
But those numbers aren't threes anymore, Rose.
That's true. That's even more important. And you discarded a card, so you're not drawing 3. You're drawing 3, discarding 1, which is like that much less exciting.
It's and way less symmetrical too. So just bad all around. Okay.
Yes. You can play this EX though. I think that's tolerable. It's still range 1 to 3 and 3 gauge, but now it's 4 4 4 4 4. That's okay.
4 is pretty cool.
That's okay.
Yeah. The problem then is that you don't get to hit with it again later, and it sounds like you really want to.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, hitting with it gets you closer to hitting with it again because you draw 3, and that means you're probably going to get to your next shuffle.
True. True. That's a good way to look at it. Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, it doesn't like if you EX it, it's not because you're changing any interactions really. Like the most notable interactions is like now you can play it on defense and not worry about spike,
or dive it at range 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it doesn't like chain, and it's just a little more power and armor is you trade a fair bit. It would be nice if you could win every strike cleanly. That's what your goal is because you have this really good economic tool set.
Right.
But you're not going to. You're going to trade sometimes, and trading better is better.
Makes sense.
Simple as that. So notable normals. Let's rock. Topic of trading better. You don't need Grasp as much as a lot of characters to call out mid speeds and stuff because you have Fujin, you have Ko, you have this 2 gauge stun immunity. You can get away with spending this for Let's Rock, and you probably should because this is power and gauge.
Right.
And you like both of those.
And you can hit consistently enough that this probably isn't going to be that much of a gamble. You can probably engineer a situation where this is almost guaranteed, or at least requires a very hard call out on your opponent's part.
Sort of. We're going to keep going back to this. You are a pretty mix-up heavy character. You can't do these setups that some characters can do where you're just like, okay, I win the next strike.
Okay.
You play a lot of mix-ups on offense and defense. The nice thing is on offense, it's easy to guarantee on offense that Let's Rock at least connects with the opponent, even if you don't automatically win the strike based off of it.
Yeah, I guess.
And on defense, you're more likely to win a strike on defense than a lot of characters are.
True. Okay, that makes sense.
So that's a good normal. Cross area shift gives you gauge. Area shift gives you positioning. Like we want your opponent to be cornered. Now they are. Cross is a mid speed, which going back to like we're evaluating this kit in the context of we're going to be playing mostly front side. Mid speeds are valuable for you because slows are the question you need to answer. With your relatively low power values, like slows are your lose condition and just trading with a bunch of slows.
Sure.
This is a way to not trade with slows. You are, as we talked about, reasonably close range, but like you can go out to 4 and you're completely fine with that. You can go out to 5 and you have ways to get back in. It's not the end of the world.
Right. And so you say cross is a mid speed because you're often playing it at range 1 where those slows are kind of most online.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, it also does beat them at range 2 as well. So
right.
Yes.
Sure.
I think range 1 cross is pretty strong for a lot of characters, really.
Yep. Makes sense.
This card is another one. This is a mid speed again.
Yep.
But this is also faultless. I think pairs pretty differently with your character than a lot of characters. You'll see characters that like I want to boost faultless and hopefully my opponent doesn't want to strike into me and I get a gauge, or I want to boost faultless and I want to cancel it and then do something really threatening.
Right.
You're like I want to boost faultless and I'm just going to sit there and then if they strike into me, I have like 7 guard Fujin. Or I get a gauge if they don't strike into me, and I'm happy about either one.
Yeah, you're okay with either of those because honestly, Fujin with 7 guard is gonna hit.
Yes,
and you get and you know you didn't get gauge from faultless, but you got gauge from Fujin anyway.
Yep. They also just like you also Fujin became a card that's not a mix-up card anymore. Fujin is just, I guess. So what you were saying about you can set up situations where you will always hit. Fair enough, actually.
Right.
You won't always win the strike, but you will basically always hit.
Right. Okay.
Because Fujin now beats both the slash and the dive.
Right.
So yeah, Faultless just makes a lot of your cards a little more reliable. Mostly Fujin and Ko, to be honest.
Right.
Because Rin still loses to things that move you.
It
Naviha doesn't need that much to be reliable, and Shutsu's probably not reliable even with more guard.
Right. And it's also a way to get your defenses up without spending, I guess you're spending a force, but you're not spending speed.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Makes sense.
But again, you're weak to slows, thus it's important. This is a mix-up option. So
right.
Very similar with Rin, as a matter of fact. These are both ways to get some armor and get some effective defenses. And these both are slows that you would like to have in some situations.
Sure.
So, Sweep and Badass. This is you sometimes trade. Badass helps you trade, helps you win cleanly. But you can also just play Sweep, and that also trades well. So you have to kind of choose which side of this card you value more.
Right. And it's always strong for every character. Making that choice is always impactful.
Yep. Notably, EXs play pretty well with your ability for a lot of reasons because, again, we just talked about a little bit more guard on your specials makes them better. Having an EX lets you use your ability, and now you are... So you either have EX stats, which is like most cases Swift, +1 power, +1 speed are the ones that matter, or you could have +1 power and +4 guard, effectively.
Sure, yeah, and go speed neutral at the cost of 1 more force. Yeah, and that could matter to some interactions depending on what you're trying to do.
Yep. So EXs are strong for you. Badass gives you EXs.
Makes sense.
And focus, we talked about the guaranteed scramble, but guaranteed in quotes.
Right.
It is also just focus. So
makes sense. Speaking, now that you've mentioned EXs, Badass giving you EXs crucially without costing both copies of a card. Because you are a mix-up character, would you almost always prefer to be Badass into EXing rather than doing like a natural EX because that would get rid of both copies of your card? Or are there times where you would use both?
I would use both. Because Sweep is valuable, Badass is valuable, and just like... Even if you give up an option, this is your option that's pretty hard to replace. These options are all like a little flexible with each other, sort of.
Okay.
Like these are all like sort of reliable at different ranges. They're all,
you can kind of adjust your play if you don't have Ko anymore. You can probably make it work with these two. With this, you're actually losing like a part of your side of your mix-up rather than a component of your mix-up. Okay, and I guess the other thing is like you can natural EX as a surprise defensively, and you're frequently happy to do so. And you can't really do that with Badass.
Yep. And also, I guess your cards are a little low impact to EX a lot of the times. Like this is a slash bike, which is good to EX in general, but you're losing Fujin. And then these cards, most of them don't care too much about being EX'd. I would argue that the rest of your cards, almost all, don't care. This is actually like probably bad to EX because now it's faster.
True. Yeah, interesting.
So, it's the value of the EX for you a lot of times is just about like trading a value more than winning cleanly, which it's a little less exciting than the EX is for a lot of characters.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you're not necessarily. So I mean, EX dive is cool because now you are winning cleanly. If you found a way to engineer an EX dust to win cleanly, you can make that happen.
Yeah. Normals appreciate the EX probably most.
I got you. But your specials are more about upping your deltas and your trades, and you're going to be doing a lot of that anyway. Okay.
So back to the character ability, part 2.
Yes, I have to know. Tell me how to navigate this thing.
So we're going to talk about caveats to all the things I said earlier. We said mostly works with specials. We just kind of touched on the first one of those. Well, EXs with normals. Here is your like 4 effective guard slash that does 5 damage.
Yep. Because
you EX'd it and spent. That matters a fair bit. Slows. It really sometimes like you have Soul facing you. You're sitting in the corner. He's like, okay, I'm going to boost some nonsense. I'm going to play Wild Throw. You know it's Wild Throw, but you're about to be hit for like 8 damage, ignoring armor. And most characters just look at that and like, okay, I guess I'll like play like a grasp or a slash and get like a little bit of damage in response.
Right.
You can say, I'm gonna actually sweep you back. It'll
Right.
cost me a force. Like it's not a good trade, but it's a better trade than not having a trade.
Right. And Soul probably invested something to get that much to get that
Yes.
positioning in
Yep.
the first place. It's Soul. He's trying to do that the whole game.
Yep. And then with your exceed side, that is the other caveat. Like, you can just throw this on stuff, and it'll make you less likely to win the strike, but the cost of losing the strike will be lower.
Right.
Like, if I just throw out the speed 2 dust, it probably loses to all the same things that normally dust loses to, with the exception of maybe they will spike you back, which is like a real threat.
Sure.
When you are using this
when
on
you're
offense.
using this side of the ability, sure. Because I mean, now you not only are you lowering your speed, but you are incentivizing them to ignore your armor if they can, because you have armor.
Yep.
Okay.
But if they don't spike you back, if they just like, oh, I'm going to cross out, I'm going to play slash, I'm going to do something that beats dust.
Right.
Well, now you lost way less badly.
You took one
sort
or
of.
2 damage and a force, I guess.
Yeah, that's the caveat to the caveat. The force matters a lot because you have all this force, all this card draw, all this gauge in your kit. You could be doing really cool things with that. You could just like keep the tempo really high and force your opponent to play reactive to you, or you can spend it all on the ability every turn.
Okay.
So when do you exceed versus not? Here's like factors I'm thinking about, like the timing of it. If it's really early game and I get free gauge, then like maybe, okay, well I'm going to upgrade my ability all game. That is kind of like intuitively, that's the best time to exceed for a lot of characters. Like the earlier you can do it, the longer you get value out of it.
Sure, yeah. If there's 2 strikes in a game, you don't care. If there's 10 strikes in a game, you might care more because that's more numbers.
Yep. But I think there's still trade-offs in that case. So like, this is something that I'll consider, but often getting free gauge early game is not enough to make me want to exceed. It just makes it more appealing because I can use that gauge to just like immediately play this or like cancel something. Other timing aspects. Super late game, shockingly. Like 2 strikes in a game, okay. 2 strikes with 2 armor is a lot better than 2 strikes without 2 armor.
That's true. And it's also, I mean, it's 2 versus 10 strikes. It's also 2 versus 10 strikes that you're discarding a force on. And if those two uses of your ability are really impactful, maybe you got your value out of it.
So yeah, super late game, this can be helpful just to like change the math and important interactions because in late game, right, everything that leads to you having a chance to win the game becomes viable.
Right.
And if you need 2 armor a couple of times to win the game, then it doesn't matter if it was expensive, the force cost or whatever, it doesn't matter after the game's over.
Sure.
The fact that you needed the 2 armor to win does.
That makes sense.
And then you could kind of, something that people talk about Season 5 exceeds like the overdrive, like you get the opponent in the corner and like, you don't overdrive in this board state because they just like boost backstep and they're gone and you've wasted your overdrive.
Right.
I'd say this is a little similar because you're investing a lot of resources into it. It does stick around, but if you invest a lot of resources and then like it's just not useful immediately, that's a lot worse than investing resources you can immediately use.
Okay.
Like if you get to the opponent to a situation where like we're sitting here, we're just going to like throw nonsense at each other until the game ends. Armor's better than guard in that situation.
Right.
So other situations, if the opponent's particularly low damage, just like 2 armor matters more if every strike is hitting for like 3 than if every strike's hitting for 8.
Okay. That makes sense. You just over the course, they are more likely to be the kind of character that is hitting you a lot consistently and frequently for low damage. Your chunk percentage wise, you're chunking more of that damage out by armor than it would be if it was like 1 strike for a lot.
Yep.
Okay.
And then opponents who like to trade a lot because you do have like you can win cleanly. You have the tools. But if your opponent is good at preventing you from winning cleanly, just having stats is good.
Right.
And then I think this might be like a really big one, is just like, what are the interactions with your opponent's specific ignore guard and ignore armor options? If your opponent has overhead and is likely to hit you with like an overhead 7 power thing, you probably really want this sweep to actually work against it. If your opponent has like, what's a good one? Here, I'll get 2 just to prove that there are.
You're talking about Chun-Li has one. Not a boost. You're talking about like an on curve or like a bad moon or a.
I moved on to the ignore guard side.
Ignore guard. I gotcha. Yeah.
If your opponent has like this type of shape, These are both pretty scary cards.
Sure. Snip, snip, snip from Faust is another one from this season
Yep.
that people are terrified of.
Yep. This card, Amelia's like, throw this card out, like, I'm going to win the strike. And then sometimes your opponent plays EX Focus, and you're like, oh, I lost the game.
Right.
If you have this just 2 armor on any attack, it's really hard for Amelia to just say, oh, I'm going to swing Braid and I'll win the strike. Staff of Surging just doesn't even hurt you anymore.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you ignored guard at that point.
Yeah, so that's something I'm looking for pretty highly, is like, if my opponent is doing like low damage ignore guard attacks, and I can just remove those from the mix-up, or make them way harder, way scarier for the opponent to play,
right,
that is a really good source of value.
Okay.
And then, yeah, like we just said, the opposite as well. If the opponent is ignoring armor pretty frequently, that makes me less interested in exceeding.
Maybe stick around on front side more. So that's a lot of kind of like minor to moderate use cases for exceeding, and with like, and those are in some combination of those. If those factors are present, you are thinking about exceeding more heavily. Is it a situation where it's like, okay, I need all of those things in order to really consider exceeding, or is like having 2 or 3 of those check boxes ticked is enough to make you flip?
It's probably closer to you need a lot of them than just a couple.
Okay.
In my opinion. I will talk one last set of caveats, and then we'll get into the juice of like when I actually want to exceed, etc.
Sure.
Last thing that I said with caveats is like, you use this ability mostly on defense. Well, we talked about this one with Rin. When it's a checkmate, this ability is perfect on offense.
Right.
And then like, if you exceed, this ability is good on offense.
Right.
Especially if the opponent's in the corner. I keep doing this just like without even talking about it. But if you exceed, part of the problem with this ability on offense is it tells your opponent, okay, I can play cross, and unless Anji's played exactly Ko, it'll work. And even Ko, like, that's a really bad trade for me, but at least I got like gauge. Like, I still hit. But at this range, you strike with this ability, cross beats everything but Ko. And I guess this card, but
right,
it's serving the same purpose as Ko.
Sure, and it costs more.
Yep. So if the opponent's cornered, now they have to play dive. And you can actually beat dive while using your ability. You could be like, I'm going to throw out a slash for the mix-up. I'm going to throw out a Fujin.
Yep.
And they dive, and now you're here. They've used their dive, and now you can really have fun. You can do like a 4 armor focus that they can't dive over because they just use their dive.
They just use their dive up, yeah, and now you're just winning the numbers game.
Yep. So that's when I would use this ability on offense. You notice most of those are on the exceed side. Like on the checkmates thing is true whether exceeded or not, but if you're not exceeded, it doesn't matter that they now have to dive to not trade with you. You're not actually improving your trade, and you're making yourself more likely to trade by reducing your speed.
Right. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I mean, who cares if the dive didn't hit anyway?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So, in most matchups and most board states, I won't exceed, and that's because of these like opportunity costs.
Right.
You're spending a force. You're committing this free gauge up front that you have to now. Now, if you commit this free gauge up front and you keep using this as like a niche tool when it's best, you spent a lot of gauge for something you're not using super often. So you want to use this, but now you're committed to this plan where you're spending more force and you're losing speed and a lot of strikes.
Right.
Which means you're going to trade instead of win cleanly. And you do have some things that encourage you to trade with these 2 cards. But just like in this game, it's better to win cleanly than trade if you can. This game expects you to trade. Trading is like, okay, this is a game functioning. This doesn't put either player too far ahead because both players got some gauge, both players got something they wanted out of a strike, right? Like, they grasp me and I sweep. Okay, I did more damage, I got some force, but they also got what they wanted out of their grasp. They got their positioning.
Right.
And you are committing to a plan where you will trade a lot more often once you've exceeded. But you can already trade on defense without exceeding. You are in charge of whether you trade or not on front side.
Whether or not you spend 3 gauge on it.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't. I should say you don't have to spend 3 gauge on it in order to be in charge of that. In fact, if you do spend the 3 gauge on it, you're saying you're not in charge of it anymore. You already
You're
made
less in charge. You still can.
You made the decision.
It is a mix-up. But yes, you've got to get your value out of the free gauge.
Yeah. It's almost like a buyer's remorse situation.
Yep.
Interesting.
So when do I exceed? If the game's going to come down to trading, like, again, we're sitting here, it's exceeded Leo, exceeded Anji, we're just throwing wild things at each other. I had a game like this very recently. Well, yeah, it's exceeded Leo. He's already got +1 speed on me. +2 speed is not that big of a difference. And now I have 2 armor, which could matter quite a bit.
Which is gonna matter because some number of those strikes, many of them, are gonna come down to trading.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, if your opponent's caught at close range with these like limited cards, they're not going or just wants to be a trade character in the first place.
Right.
They're not going to like leave and say, okay, we're not trading anymore. They're stuck here. If it really helps you finish up the game, this draw 1 and strike matters. It's not the biggest deal because it's pretty small economic value. I think the reason this is here is so like you can't exceed and then be sad that you didn't have any force to spend. By and large.
Sure, yeah, it's a little bit of a refund so you can use your ability.
Yep. But sometimes the game is close, you need that. You're going to strike, the game is going to resolve itself in the next like 2 or 3 turns. You need that extra card, you might as well get some extra armor, it could help quite a bit with your mix-ups. So I actually, despite kind of in a vacuum you should exceed early, I exceed most often pretty late in the game because I think that'll help me close the game out.
That makes sense. But
and then if the opportunity cost is lower for some reason, like I've boosted this and I got this swept out of my hand, and
you're just not competing for that resource as much anymore.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. But most of the time you're planning not to exceed, and that means that we should probably evaluate your ability and your game plan in the context of not exceeding most of the time. And what you've said so far about this ability, it's mostly on defense outside of checkmates, and you are not actually using it that frequently even on defense. And when it comes up, you'll kind of know because the things that are in your hand are the things that are going to benefit from
it. For the most part, yes, those are all true. The one thing is, this ability is like a really swingy ability because this is, I guess I didn't really talk about this enough. Sweep does 6 damage. Focus does 4 damage and has 2 armor.
Yep.
These both have economic value on them. This is a lot of the value of these cards. If you play a slash into a sweep, the reason you're sad is not that you traded down 2, it's that the card that you intended to play after the slash got swept out of your hand.
Sure.
So when you use this ability, you are always accepting that part of the... No matter what happens afterwards, you are losing this economic value. It adds up.
You are discarding a card every single time, no matter what, and that matters because sweep and focus matter. Because of that interaction, it matters.
Yeah. The reason sweep and focus, part of the reason they're so good is the economic value.
Demonstrative of that interaction is that sweep and focus matter. I got you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But what this ability does do for you, this is why I like staying on front side, is because this ability sometimes lets you just say, I get a huge amount of value this 1 strike for 1 force.
Right.
I'm playing against Ken with Hadouken because it does 6 damage instead of reuse 4. And Ken sits here and he's like, okay, I'm going to crit Hadouken you.
Yep.
Most characters, you have a cross, or you just have to deal with 6 damage somehow.
You've got
for 1 force, you could trade evenly.
Specifically, and get in, and make it so that he can't loop you, like all of the things that, Ken's range game plan crumbles in the face of that.
Yeah. Or, this is going back to what we talked about with Fujin. Slash and dive. People like playing Slash at range 3. Slash is just like a really solid card. Like we were saying, even when you trade down that badly, it's your turn, you get to do something, assuming it didn't get swept out of your hand. Fujin says, no, it's not your turn. I win the strike, I hit you harder, I draw a card, and it's my turn now.
Right.
That's a huge deal when you win a strike like that.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, really, if you got 2 armor in that case. In either case, you got what you wanted out of a strike.
Right. The actual damage value is a bonus on top of it, but really what you got was your advantage in your card draw and hitting back and all of the things that you did.
Yep.
Okay.
So I would say using this ability sometimes lets you it's like if you have like a graph, right, and you have like a curve of like when this ability is good or not. you're the one who gets to draw the line through that curve and say, I'm going to use this ability in this set of situations.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah, at this threshold of goodness, right? Anything above
yes,
the good line is when I'll use this ability.
yep.
Okay.
And that, unfortunately, that does. You are a Exceed character who plays the game, and you don't get to cheat. You don't get to look at your opponent's attack before you do this. So there are mix-ups, and those mix-ups are pretty big deals.
Right.
Because when you play this Fujin into a dive, if you didn't spend for it, this is like, okay, their opponent, this is a pretty normal strike. Your opponent tried a mid-speed, they got punished with the on-curve call-out.
Right.
If you play this Fujin and you spend for it, or sorry, if you play this Fujin into an assault and you don't spend for it, this is also a pretty normal strike. You tried to defend on curve, you did not succeed, they got the assault, that's value for them.
Right.
But the cases where you do spend increase the risk reward, because you spent for the dive, now you lost to a dive, but you also lost an extra force because you got swept.
Right. Right.
But now you beat an assault, and you stole advantage back. So, yeah. It's a lot of evaluation of that risk reward when it's not the two cases, I guess. Sometimes it's a lot of evaluation of the risk reward. Other times it's like, oh, I have my answer to Ken Hadoken that he knows I have.
Right.
So I'll trade when I wouldn't have traded.
That makes sense. I mean, you're also what you're describing. I mean, Rose, I know that you're a fighting game player, and you've probably heard the adage about like, okay, my opponent's on defense, I'm going to make him guess. I'm going to make him hold a mix up. And if you're dealing with an opponent who has an incredibly good defensive game plan, you can sometimes feel like you as the aggressor are guessing into their defense, and that's always a very scary.
That's the threat.
Yeah,
Anji is
yeah.
holding over you.
I completely get you. Okay, so for people who don't play fighting games, Anji is here to when you are attacking in a fighting game or in Exceed, you should feel like your opponent is afraid of your attack. And Anji has this ability to, when his opponent puts a card down, they're the ones who are a little bit trepidatious about what he's going to do, and that is powerful, and that is kind of demonstrative of the power of this ability.
Yep.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense.
So, yeah. And then when you're exceeding, you draw that line through the curve we were talking about a little lower, right? Because the ability is just better on the face of it.
Right.
So you can use it in more like, okay, this is like a reasonable case to use this ability.
Yeah, you
like that's fine.
It's not.
You get value.
It doesn't need to be perfect anymore because this is just probably better. But the cost is still the same, and you need to, and the upfront cost is obviously there in the first place, so you need to evaluate all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would like to pick out the highest points of the curve of like how good this ability is and use it then.
That makes sense.
And yeah.
Yeah.
That's just, I think, mostly what it comes down to.
Other players are going to take that curve and scooch the bar down a little bit, and that's going to be what they're acceptable with because they are getting something out of it that you're not, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. The early days of the game, early days of the season, I'm sure there will be a lot of fact finding and discourse about this ability, and people will develop their own lines of play specifically around it.
Yep. So other than that, it's just stuff about the kit that's worth knowing. This is a bad kit against mid speeds, except for Fujin. Like you need to call out mid speeds, which is another reason I want to be playing at the speed that I naturally have instead of slower.
Right.
Because if your opponent just like plays dust at you from this range, you need to play Fujin, you need to play Slash, you need to play Dive. If you don't have any of those, you're getting hit by dust.
Right.
We have these lots of trade-offs between these attacks and boosts, or different ways to use this ability. So this is a pretty decision-heavy character, like we kind of led with. How do you get damage over your opponent? Because you've got to win the game by doing more damage than you take. Do you try to win cleanly? You have the cards for that. You have these. This too, I guess. My hot take card. Love this card. Or do you try to win on defense because you have the like I'm going to catch the slash, etc. Because in general, people are favored on their own turn.
Yeah.
And you have ways to get around that, but they involve you playing the mix-up. You have to lean into playing the mix-up to get value out of that. And then you can trade. You can try to win on tempo. The important question with the way that I am playing is like, how do you survive the opponent's slows? Because they have delta, and you mostly don't have that high delta, and the delta you do have comes from not trading with slows, comes from being hit with fast and hitting back.
Right. So calling out your opponent's mid speeds with your, the exceed triangle, right? The fast mid speed slow triangle. You need to win it in order to win with Anji. You need to call out your opponent's slows. You need to call out their mid speeds.
Yep, you have the tools to do it. You have the cards in hand. You have the force advantage. You have the option of using your cards in flexible ways, so you will be able to. It's like what's a good example of this? I mean, Anji is. We'll just keep it with Anji. You have two ways to use each of your cards, which means you need to use. You will always have the options in hand to respond in more ways than someone else with the same number of cards in hand as you.
Right.
So you need to take advantage of that. That's one of your advantages as a character is this flexibility.
And you need, and because you aren't the highest damage sort of like rigid game plan, I'm going to run my offense character. If you can't do that, you're probably falling behind to a character who is saying like, all right, I'm going to do the thing that I do better than you.
Yes.
Okay. So you need to be reactive. You need to be flexible. You can be reactive and flexible, but that is the game plan.
Yep.
Okay.
You have, as well, because you have this really or you have the option of being high tempo. I'll talk about that a little bit too. But you have the option of being really aggressive. These cards, you have this good defensive tool in your character ability, but these are just good aggressive cards. This is a range 1 spike. This is a kick that draws you cards. This is a fast dive that can also be a range 1 assault. Like, this is just really flexible ways to attack. This is a move, don't move mix up.
Right.
This is discard your opponent's hand, or most of it.
Right.
So you can, and you have all these draw, you have all these fast, short movement. You can be really aggressive. You should probably be really aggressive if you are playing this way as Anji, because this is how you can get ahead in the game, is by your advantage on your own strike. You can take more strikes than the opponent, and when you are defending, it doesn't matter that you've used up some options, because your other options can be used flexibly to defend even so.
Gotcha. Okay.
Going back to the tempo really fast, you have kind of interesting tempo. You can be very fast. You need to put on bursts of being very fast, like when you are, comboing your opponent effectively, like hitting them with the ultra advantage hitting. But you can also afford to be kind of slow, because you just have these like little short movements. You have these pretty non-committal defensive cards if you want to. So you can, like I said, you probably don't want to cancel Okizeme if you have the choice, because you just get a lot more economic value out of it that way.
Right. Until you really, really, really want to be canceling Okizeme, and the reason will be pretty obvious. It's going to be from your ability to set up a brutal combo.
Yes. So yeah, you're kind of you are this like graceful like dancer martial artist, like you're kind of like moving to the beat, you're following the speed the game's telling you to move at, and then your opponent like does something wrong and you leap in and you punish that.
Great. Okay. So you play for value until you play for tempo.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Exactly. That's a really good way to put it.
Makes sense. It's a very succinct, very good way to put it. It's also completely useless because it is so general. But no, that actually makes total sense, and I think that's Exceed's hard, right? And figuring out the flow of that game is going to be the skill testing thing. Like your character has all of these advantages, but knowing how to read that game state and knowing when you need to aggress and when to be defensive is an experiential thing. It's something that you can't really teach in a guide.
Yep. Yeah. So then again, part of why going back to the front side thing again, because it just comes up a lot when you're evaluating this character, because these are two different plans that I think both make sense.
Yeah.
But I'm arguing for mine because this is the way I know how to play a character and I think he works best. you have all this draw in your kit. This is probably partly intended to give you the option to use this ability, because this is an expensive ability. There are other characters that spend force to do things with their attacks, and a lot of them spend even more force than you, but they get rewards that are higher than you, of course, as well.
Right.
And you need to be fueling that. But if you're not using this ability too often, that force could just be force that you're throwing at hitting the opponent.
You're committing force fraud. You're getting all of this force that's clearly intended for, you're embezzling, Rose, is what you're doing.
Yeah, pretty much.
You should be using this on your character ability, and instead you're using it for like canceling things and ultras and
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you're a criminal. But it sounds sick, so I'm gonna give you a pass this time.
Yay. Yeah, we can talk about counterplay then, so that you can feel like, I don't know, you're helping the law at this point now.
All right, sure. Yeah, that's maybe an all-time great segue in the history of this show. Yeah, please tell me a little bit about counterplay, Rose.
Something that people like to talk about when counterplaying characters is like, what do you parry? I see people parry this a lot, which makes sense because reading is a card that you don't want your opponent to have. I think it might be better to parry like this free gauge ultra or a normal slow, just because these are very high value cards in a vacuum.
Right.
You could parry Fujin. And Fujin is a really strong card. For some reason, it just feels less appealing to me to parry a fast option, like a kind of like flexible, good fast option, than something that is punishing as one of these slower options. But that's an option as well. That said, the reading minigame is scary. You need to survive the reading minigame somehow. I don't blame you for parrying the 2 gauge either. Like, if you need to not get red, parry the 2 gauge, don't get red.
Yeah.
Relatedly, don't forget Anji can read you. Big part of the counterplay. Don't lose a strike for free. Losing strikes for free is bad. That's how you lose the game a lot of the time. Mid speeds are effective. Anji can't defend well against them without like calling them out. And like the drawback to this, you can raise the risk and reward by calling out their slash. You can raise the risk by not calling out their dive wrong. Like Anji gets in his own head and can lose extra bad by wasting force.
Oh, sure, it's a mix-up, right? You're doing all of this extra math. You're defending as part of your mix-up. You get it wrong. It is worse than if you got it wrong on the aggressive side, because you're not even winning speed ties anymore.
Yep. Anji does kind of want to corner you, so he can flip to this game plan. Like, this is when this game plan is good, it's good. And these cards are better when the opponent is in the corner. So don't get cornered too easily if you can avoid it.
Right.
If you're just better at trading, then you can probably get away with it, but be aware of his mix of options, because again, like you were saying, Anji on defense is kind of scary. But this one, you can also be like, Anji's the one who has to think about it, right? Like, you're the attacker. Just so either be aware, like be doing the 5D chess and be aware of the options, play to beat them, or just like do something stupid and be unpredictable and make Anji's life hard.
Sure.
Either one, really. Just pick your poison.
It just be on the right Yomi layer. Whether that is 5D chess or whether that is wild swinging into him.
Yep. And then if you have stats, use them, because Anji is pretty sensitive to stats. Power turns off this ability a lot of the time if you have enough of it. Like, okay, well, I can do the dive call out still, but I can't call out slash anymore with Fujin. I just have to play a slow. That's kind of disappointing.
Right.
Speed. Speed and power, like, by breaking the speed curve, you can hit with higher powers. It's kind of similar in that way. Also, just Anji has to play mid speeds sometimes, and it's hard to play mid speeds if you have speed up.
Into speed, sure.
And armor, because again, Anji doesn't have too many stats. So Anji doesn't have any ignore armor option except the range 1 spike. So Anji's pretty sensitive to a lot of stats. So play them if you can. Don't waste all your force overcommitting to them and then like
and then lose the mix-up, because there will probably always be a mix-up.
Yes.
Okay.
But stats are good. So yeah, and counterplay, where I teach your viewers to be criminals like me. Uh, we keep going back to this. Just risk reward is. I feel like I've said this in like every one of my guides.
Yeah.
When you make a play, think about how you win and how you lose. Don't lose a strike in a way that will lose you the game if you can avoid it. Um, you can afford to lose strikes, but you should lose strikes in ways that like advance your game plan or like force your opponent to commit something or don't cost you too much at least.
Sure.
So getting these decisions right is a really big deal. And if you do, you get to win the game. So that's a pretty nice reward. It's
Yeah.
just if you don't, you lose. So that's succeeded for you.
And like for some characters, those decision points are kind of diffused across like a handful of strikes throughout the game. With Anji, they're everywhere because you do have so many points of
Yes.
decision, and there's so many opportunities for things. There's so many opportunities for you to make a mistake.
Yes, pretty much. This ultra, I think, is a pretty big thing to like evaluate in a matchup. Like, this ultra has reading on it. This ultra has like a pretty useful, like again, a little low reward, but a pretty useful stat line, a pretty useful set of effects. And also just like again, force is good against zoners and stuff. You need to get in somehow.
Yeah.
This ultra, I feel like, is probably one of the cards that changes most in how you use it matchup to matchup. Maybe also Co. So like figuring out what you should be doing with these cards in the matchup is a big deal. Um, against the character or the opponent, I guess, because people have their playstyle preferences as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, somebody who makes themselves completely immune to reading all the time,
Yep.
you're going to change how this works.
Yep. And then lastly, like you get this up tempo a lot of the ways because you have the high economy, you have the good defenses until the opponent commits really hard to a strike. Even then, you might have decent defenses with like stun immune options, etc.
Sure.
So since you get this at the tempo, do that. Set the tempo in a way that benefits you. You can slow down a little bit because you have these reading, you have this like guaranteed scramble, quote unquote. You have control effects that let you, and you have your defenses, whether front side or backside. You have ways to slow down the game. You have ways to make the game really fast. Figure out what you want to do in the moment and do the right one.
Yeah. No, that all makes
And
sense. Okay.
yeah. I know you asked about similar characters, and this one I am not really that prepared for. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with like this guy plays Exceed.
Yeah.
Other characters who play a lot of Exceed.
He feels like a Shoto, weirdly enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Despite having
that is the one thing I have is like Shotos.
Yeah, despite having very little in common with the like he doesn't have a DP, he doesn't have like a Hadoken. He has a kick. He doesn't really have a Tatsu. Kind of, he does, I guess. Big Tatsu.
Yeah, they're all like weird versions. He's got the weird projectile, the weird kick, the weird Tatsu.
They're kind of
the weird DP, kind of.
I guess. Sure. Yeah. Sure.
The weird ignore armor option for a Shoto.
Yeah,
it's there, but it's all weird.
They're there if you squint. But in terms of his ability to just like, he is playing neutral. He is getting. He feels like a blue Shoto.
Yeah, kind of. Yep. That's actually the character I had by name, because both that Shoto kind of vibe and the like footsies game plan, that describes Kai pretty well.
Sure.
Kai is another Guilty Gear character with very similar set of questions he has to answer, where he has all these good varied tools. He has the footsies. He's got neutral options. He has to figure out how to use that to win the game. Because he also has this problem of like, you don't have that high damage numbers. You have to use your advantages to actually win strikes.
Yeah, like Kai is a character that you can look at his kit and be like, okay, I can see why that's good. I can see why that's good. I can see why that's good. None of these things actually suggest a game plan to me.
Yeah,
they are all buttons or tools in a kit. They are not a line of play, and I need to figure out how to make a line of play out of them. I can see a similar thing with Anji because he has so many points of decision.
Yep. So going back all the way back to when you said this character plays Exceed, Rose. Yes, this character plays Exceed.
Okay.
So if your character, I guess, the more your character plays Exceed, the less they play their own little mini game, the more similar they are to Anji.
I think that makes sense.
So yeah. That is everything I really have to say, unless you have questions, and then I can get into like this character's cool.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions, Rose. You did as always, did a wonderful job. This is a character I started out by saying like kind of undervalued, maybe slightly slept on, not super talked about character. To be honest with you, prior to this lesson, I was one of the people who was not really thinking that much about Anji. And you have done a lot to. Maybe it's because I like blue Shotos and I found a kindred spirit here in Anji, but
He's even blue, yeah.
yeah, it still works. For my themed team that I'm gonna make. But I'm just kidding, I don't play Exceed. But like actually for real, I was not thinking enough about this character and this guy is cool. If
Yep.
people like what they hear, there's stuff going on with this guy that I think is going to be something that you're not getting out of another character. Or honestly, or something that is going to get you closer to what Exceed is doing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
hopefully people like that. Hopefully people have learned a lot. I certainly have. Um, Rose, thank you as always for being on the show. I always appreciate your time and your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I do want to shout out a couple of things too before I go, especially since it's my last time, so I'm gonna like get on my soapbox and be like, you can't kick me off. I've done like 5 of these at least.
You've done 6. This is your 6th one. Yeah.
So yeah, character, like you said, pretty slept on, but I think both powerful and interesting. Lots of room for expression, and that's kind of the first thing I want to say. There's another guide from Jin on Board Game Geek that came out with the preview of Season 7 about
Yes.
this character, and she has a completely different game plan. She's talking about planning to exceed, using these cards in somewhat different ways. And I think that guy is super good. I would recommend checking that out too. And like this is a super flexible character. There's going to be lots of decisions, both micro and macro,
Yep.
about him. And that got me kind of thinking while I was thinking about what to say for this. Like, why is it that people can be really good at Exceed and have like find success playing characters in like very different ways from each other? Like, and both ways seem to work despite like valuing all the cards in the kit differently. And I think it's like Exceed is less like solving a jigsaw puzzle where everything goes in like one place, and it's more like you've got like a set of different scales that you have to balance with a set of different weights.
Yeah.
So you have like rather than finding the perfect place to put everything, you're like each choice that you make makes you have to make other choices differently. The most basic example of this is like where am I spending my gauge for a lot of characters? That's like a really big question. And depending on how you answer it, you have different tools, you have different economy, you probably have like a different flow of your game.
And there's no alternatives in a jigsaw puzzle. If you're doing the weights and scales puzzle, there might be a lot of solutions, and
Yep.
they might all get you to where you want to be, but you're using things in different combinations, and because you used one, or rather because you didn't use one, that one's freed up to be used later in a different way.
Yep. And I was trying to think of like a really succinct example of this, and this is why the foreshadowed second Jin card we're going to talk about this guide.
Yes.
Permafrost. I think this is like a pretty succinct example. I should probably get out his character card too for anyone who needs that for reference. This is a mid speed, but it's a pretty bad one unless the opponent lets you have a higher hand size than them.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't actually beat anything on its own unless that hit effect goes off. So it has a really solid boost. Like this is just valuable, right? You boost, you get some guard, your attack's more reliable, you draw some cards. So maybe you just boost this card. And Jin has a lot of choices about how to spend his gauge. He can spend for this after draw, he can spend for his pretty good ultras, he can spend for exceeding, he can spend for this astral, which is like one of the better astrals in the game, I think.
Yep.
So a lot of the time, this card might be a boost, and then you spend that gauge that you get with the reliable 4 card to do something cool. But what if your game plan is to exceed? If you exceed as Jin, it basically says like you pick up your whole deck and your opponent just discards their whole deck.
Yeah,
It's like
kind
it's
of.
shorthand. So
Yeah,
if you exceed, you will get to a point where you have more cards in hand than your opponent. And then this
Yes.
card is super scary.
Yes.
This card is speed 4, 7 power. Most mid speeds don't get to just like beat slows by stunning them, like doing enough damage to beat them. but like Jin has that and ignore armor and plus power now strike.
And also, okay, so to kind of to your point about how these evaluations beget other evaluations. This ultra is stupid. This ultra is like one of the benchmarks of like I know that my friend Poulter, a friend of the show, Poulter Ghost, has a lot to say about that this ultra should probably be 4 gauge. It's very, very strong. But if you are crutching on Exceed side Jin, having way more cards in hand than your opponent, that means that you're crutching on Permafrost. That means that this boost is ridiculous.
Yep.
And well, I'm not spending my 3 gauge anymore on Moonsong because I've already spent it on my Exceed side. So all of these different elements work in tandem to develop a playstyle that is completely different than this one, right?
Yep.
That doesn't involve this one at all or involves this instead.
Yep. And like these playstyles are the other thing about that weights and scales puzzle, right, is like there's probably like one answer which is best, but there's a bunch of answers that are really, really close.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to figure out which one.
Or there's one answer that's best for you, right?
Yes.
And if I've seen a couple people who like they are playing in a way that works the best for them, and they've just found a character and it's they vibed with it so thoroughly that they just start they just start winning, right? They have figured something out about that character and the way they play it that works for them.
Yep. So, but all this to say, like, try things. I spent a lot of time preparing for this guide, just like playing Exceeded Anji because I hadn't done so as much. Like, I came pretty quickly to the conclusion that this way worked better for me, and then I'm like, oh no, I actually have to justify it to Your Face's viewers. So let me try the alternatives and see. And I found some more appreciation for like when I want to exceed. Previously, I'd exceeded even less than I do currently. But like, yeah, sometimes play the way you think is best and refine it. Other times, like play the ways that you don't understand and see what works. Because the other thing about this game is it's not chess. Your deck order matters. You don't have control of it. You put yourself in different. I mean, even in chess, you put yourself in different situations every game, and sometimes you need to adapt to what's actually happening in the game. So having all these different tools in your toolbox, like, is a good thing because you can pull out the right tool for the situation every time you need it.
Right.
Yeah, bringing it back to other videos in this series, like Akuma's D guide was pretty eye-opening for me. D's Akuma guide.
My favorite Exceed player, Akuma.
Yeah, and my favorite Exceed character, D, who loses to Spike, just like this kid.
Yep, just like, yep.
Like, he talked about there's 2 lines that he knows of. You can play the kind of standard Akuma style or just like really aggressive Akuma. And like that, okay, sure, it makes sense. I think aggressive Akuma is super cool. I started playing him after watching that guide. But the thing that he talked about that kind of stuck with me is like, it's hard to transition between those styles within a game because you're using these cards in different ways in different styles. And like for standard Akuma, you've spent all these like slows and such as speed boosts, and now you don't have a really good mix-up.
Yep. Going back to the Jin example, every time you do this for value,
now you can't EX Permafrost later for 8 damage.
You can't EX Permafrost, and maybe that means that Moonsong is better as an attack because you're not going to use preemptive strike on Permafrost in your Exceed mode, and like all of those cascading decisions kind of line up in a certain way in the middle of a game.
Yep. Yeah. What got me thinking about this, another thing I want to shout out was like, there's a Slayless Fire streamer who's pretty well known called Joribs or Joinribs, is what he used to be. He had this video on YouTube, really interesting, about short-term versus long-term decision-making in Slay the Spire, where he talks about exactly this, like, you are solving this really complicated puzzle with all these different inputs, and it's possible for wildly different-looking solutions to be similar in effectiveness because, or to be really hard to distinguish between which is more effective because you have all these different ways you can change and like substitute things in places of each other.
Right.
So yeah, that's one of the things I like most about this game is that you do get to be so flexible game to game or character to character, or even just like what playstyle you want to go with. You can make it work. It's really expressive, which is a thing. Also, real time, real fighting games have as well. Like
Yeah,
you get to
definitely.
choose what
They
you do.
they have player expression in that way, and the way that Exceed models that is through this kind of like decision complexity.
Yep. So, yeah. So yeah, going back to I guess the intro to every guide you've put out, where it's like, this is my strategy. I'm pretty happy with this one. Um, but I think it's interesting to think about just like that you can have such different strategies that perform super well at the same high levels based on the player's preferences and what they see about the character.
Yeah, absolutely. And as this character starts to get developed more, and we will see sort of like the camps emerge, right? And then conveniently we have these things called tournaments where somebody is going to win, and if somebody wins with Anji, that character or rather that strategy is the one that gets talked about the most and gets sort of enshrined in the meta. But that doesn't make the other similarly valuable, maybe ambiguously more or less valuable, like you were saying, that doesn't diminish their value. It just kind of makes them go underground. And then we need, you know, exposés like D's Akuma video talking about no, like Rushdown Akuma actually does work to make a very experienced Exceed player like Rose be like, hold on, wait, what? That's a real thing? Like
Yep.
Rose, you've been playing Exceed for a while now. You were quite good at this game. That can still happen at your level of play. I think that says a lot for Exceed's depth that you can have your blinders on, reach the level of success that you've reached, and then be like, oh wow, there's more to this game than I thought there was.
Yep. Yeah, I used to like really dislike Akuma. I was like, oh, this character's so boring. You just do your setups. No, his character is like super. You could, as he also talked about in the guide, despite the difficulties, you can switch between these two playstyles
Yeah,
sometimes depending on the game state. So like, yeah, it's just really flexible and yeah. So that's my soapbox because he can't. I've done six
I
guys. He's going to kick me off now anyway. So
I legally cannot stop Rose. I'm trying desperately on my other monitor to file an injunction against her, and it's not working. Despite her being an avowed criminal, she said on the video it still isn't working. I can't get her off the soapbox.
well, you are right now because I am going to step down and say just thanks so much again for having me on. It's been a blast working on the series, and yeah, I'm looking forward to watching all the new videos when they come out.
Absolutely, Rose. And listen, I'm willing to accept you soapboxing, but um, trying to thank me as though you're not the one doing me the favor is something that I cannot abide. You are the one who is providing value to the show by you being here. Thank you so much, as always, for your time and your expertise. Um,
It's been
uh,
a pleasure.
yeah, it has. I am gonna miss running these guides with you. I'm looking forward to the next time we get to talk. And viewers at home, hopefully you enjoyed our Anji guide slash sentimental podcast about Exceed, I guess. Listen, you're gonna take what you can get. It's free entertainment. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your attention. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Yep. Take care.